Uh, We are recording, and so I would call the June 6, 2025 Colorado Produced Water Consortium meeting to order. Thank you everyone for being here and participating. Thank you Garfield County for hosting us at their facility here. We're really excited to be on the Western Slope. We're excited to all be together in person, and so really appreciate everyone taking the time to participate in this important meeting at the Produced Water Consortium. So just to start and to give a little bit of background to the folks that maybe weren't here at the last meeting or haven't been paying attention, this is a second meeting that we're having about the barrier we identified as part of one of our deliverables that we did last year, and that barrier that we determined that we're going to look at a little harder is the prohibition of centralized produced water treatment facilities and disproportionate impact on communities. Right now, we are not having debate or deliberations or coming up with conclusions on the topic. We're really just learning about a broad spectrum of information that may be relevant to upcoming discussions on that topic. In May, we held a virtual meeting, and we focused our educational presentations on topics associated with that identified barriers as it relates to Front Range. And this meeting now, we're identifying and hearing education and presentations on topics as it relates to the Western Slope. So happy to be on the Western Slope. We did start the morning this morning with a tour of the centralized produced water treatment facility, and really appreciate Kirtland, Christine, QB, and TEP for organizing that for us and allowing the consortium members to get out on the ground and better understand what a centralized produced water treatment facility is, how it's sited on the Western Slope. We'll hear more about that facility and other facilities in some upcoming presentations here. But if anyone has any comments that they would like to make about that trip that we took this morning to visit that facility, I can look forward. No one has any comments related to it. We'll hear more about it during the presentations. And so we've got a big agenda in front of us. We're going to hear from Hope to begin with. We're going to hear public comment. We've got Dr. Aaron Sidlako, our Assistant Director for Research, is going to give us an overview of the finalized deliverable 9, which is identifying toxicological and analytical methods for potential beneficial use outside of produced water outside the oil field. This is the literature review that was done. And so this consortium has not made any conclusions associated with that report, but rather just identifying studies that have been done out there on the topic and trying to better understand the research that's happened on that topic. That's a first stage of a multi-stage process that this consortium is determined it will undertake to better understand research gaps or additional studies or information consortium could participate in and work on to better understand the concept of toxicological and analytical methods for treatment of produced water for beneficial use outside of the oil field. We're going to have a number of presentations on addressing potential barriers to increased use of recycled produced water due to restriction of centralized produced water storage and treatment facilities on the Western Slope. We'll hear from Jeff Kirtland, Christine Spansky, Sean Brennan on technical considerations when siting centralized produced water storage and treatment in Beyond's oil and gas production basin. We're going to hear from Carmia Woolley, who's the state natural resource specialist for the BLM on the evolution of produced water management on Bureau of Land Management lands. We're going to hear from Stephen Aruza, who's the environmental justice liaison for ECMC, who's going to talk about produced water facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. We're going to hear from Matt Sura, who's an attorney for the Western Colorado Alliance on historical considerations for produced water on the Western Slope. We'll hear from Commissioner Doug Overton from Rio Blanco County, DI Communities, Natural Resources in Rio Blanco County. We'll hear from Kirby Wynn, the Oil and Gas Liaison for Garfield County, Glenn Hartman, Community Development Director for Garfield County, and Philip Berry, Principal Planner for Garfield County on Garfield County end use planning, land use permitting, and our perspective on centralized facilities with seeds. Big agenda, a lot of information there. And so what I hope we can do is get through everyone. Be great. And really, if we're asking questions of these presenters, I'd like those questions ideally to be to better understand the perspective of the presenter. Again, I remind us that we'll get into discussions and deliberations on these topics over the next couple of meetings. And so today is not a day for deliberations or discussions, but rather to better understand the varying perspectives that are going to be presented today, so that we all have a good baseline of knowledge as we enter into our deliberation and discussion phases in the next couple of years. All right. I'm going to stop talking and have a bite of pizza, and so I'm handing this over to Hope.
Thank you, Chair. And welcome to our meeting. And I do want to give our host a little minute to say welcome. So Commissioner Doug Overton is our host, as well as Jeff Kirtland and Kirby Wynn. So Commissioner Overton, would you like to say some welcoming remarks?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. An honor to have you all here in Western Slope, down the rifle. I don't know how many of you know, but we hit the top of the hill. We're in Rio Blanco now. Drove down, and then just that facility is just barely in Garfield County. So for a long time, we were in Rio Blanco County. Welcome. The Western Slope is region is defined by rugged beauty, natural resources, and hard work and spirit of the people that make it home. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Jeff?
You know, I just want to say welcome. I'm going to have some additional comments during my presentation. So in the interest of time, I'll for Mr. Wynn.
Kirby?
Not much to say. I'm Kirby Wynn with Garfield County Oil and Gas Liaison. Appreciate all of y'all being here and folks that are tuned in online. Of course, we have over 11,000 active natural gas wells in our area, within just our county alone. And it's an important economic engine for our area. And we think that we've come up with a good way to have a good balance between environmental and people protections. That's what it is. So for everybody to learn about how things are done out here in Western Colorado. It's distinctly different terrain, as you will see and hear, as compared to what you learned about produced water over on the Front Range at a recent meeting. So we just look forward to I look forward to learning from a lot of folks that will be speaking today, and we look forward to sharing what we have to say.
Thank you, Kirby. And this is a beautiful facility, and the landscape outside, the scenery is amazing. For those members of the public, welcome. You are welcome to enjoy the pizza buffet that is outside. For our public and members online, most of the presentations today are on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium's web page. Next, I'd like to call on Tricia Piper to share some news. Tricia? You're muted.
Hey, this is actually Jesse Newland. I don't know if Trish has joined.
Okay.
I'm not sure if she's on the call, so I joined through her link, but
Okay,
her news is she's retiring next week. So, so she will not be representing EPA. And my name is Jesse Newland. I'm with the RCRA Hazardous Waste Unit here, Region 8, and I'll be taking her place.
okay, so Tricia is retiring June 16th, and Jesse Newland has been appointed as the new representative holding a federal seat. So welcome, Jesse. I'm glad you could make it.
Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you.
For the members in the room, Jermaine, raise your hand. Jermaine will be collecting signatures, correct? For our travel expense reimbursements. This is very important because our fiscal year is ending. Please, please, please see Jermaine before you leave today. And then I just wanted to tell everyone our next meetings are July 11th and August 8th. Thank you.
Thanks, Hope. And just so everyone knows, Colorado Produced Water Consortium consists of 32 different members.
31.
31. That's I was counting you.
I know, I am not a member.
But that consists of representatives from disproportionately impacted communities, environmental and conservation NGOs, individuals with expertise in produced water, operators, industry, local governments, federal and state agencies, and representatives of research institutions and institutions of higher education.
No, you did a great job. Thank you.
And so we've got a really diverse voices on the consortium. And the consortium does not have any regulatory authority, but rather it is an entity that works on difficult problems, difficult questions, and comes up with consensus-based recommendations to different federal or state agencies and legislature, topics associated with produced water in the state of Colorado. So with that, I would like to open up the floor to public comment. I don't have a list of public commenters, so hope maybe if you would just call out folks for public comment. We appreciate all comments from the public. We ask particularly today that those comments stays 3 minutes. We've got a big agenda today. Folks, after the meeting, back to the different places that they came from and stayed. And so that you can make sure you can comments to 3 minutes. If you have more information you'd like to provide the consortium that is longer than 3 minutes, please feel free to provide written comment as well. There's a comment is both provided to all the consortium members, posted on our website. Okay.
Thank you. Is Natasha Ledger here or online? Ledger. I'm sorry.
Just elevated Natasha.
And while we're waiting for that, Jennifer, can you get the presentation ready? I'll call on Andrew next.
Natasha, are you with us?
Can you hear me and see me?
We can hear you and we can see you, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I apologize that I'm not able to be there in person today, but thank you all for coming to the Western Slope, and thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning. My name is Natasha Leger. I'm the Executive Director at Citizens for a Healthy Community, an impacted citizens group located in Paonia. CHC is a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the air, water, and food sheds of the North Fork Valley. We have over 500 members and represent farmers, vintners, orchardists, hunters, businesses, and residents. The North Fork Valley is a unique corner of the state on the edge of the Piceance Basin, We currently do not have a lot of oil and gas activity in our area, but are concerned about proposals to increase production in our watershed. The North Fork Valley is home to the largest concentration of organic farms in the state, the headwaters to the second largest tributary to the Colorado River Basin, the most popular game unit, and rare and irreplaceable ecosystem. We have reason to protect the parts of uninhabited Colorado that communities depend upon for the water, livelihood, health, sustainable ecosystems, and public lands. I'm here today because the consortium has been tasked with considering recommendations for narrowing the prohibition on new centralized E&P facilities within disproportionately impacted communities under HB 23-1242. First, I want to say that this consortium is doing important work. Produced water is an expensive problem for the industry and a big environmental problem for communities in the state. The primary goal of this consortium is to reduce the consumption of fresh water use within oil and gas operations and to develop recommendations on the reuse and recycling of produced water that are protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife. Second, it is a real travesty that the ECMC, which under SB 19-181 is charged with regulating oil and gas operations in a manner that first avoids adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife, including environmental impacts on any air, water, soil, or biological resource resulting from oil and gas operations, is asking this consortium to consider recommendations for narrowing the explicit statutory protection for DICs that would definitively avoid adverse impacts. So let me say that again. The statutory prohibition on E&P facilities and DICs avoids adverse impacts to communities from emissions, truck traffic, spills, pipelines, roads. Industry sees this as a barrier to new development, but this is a certainty that communities will not be harmed. Your goal is to reduce the use of fresh water, not to expand oil and gas operations. I'm here today to ask you not to be distracted by this request. You have enough of a challenge dealing with understanding the toxicology of the chemicals treatment of produced water to first determine if it can be safely reused and recycled. I look forward to today's meeting and hearing from others. This is the beginning of our comments on this topic, and I thank you for your time today.
Thanks for your comments, Natasha, and always participating in the processes. Who's next?
Were we able to find Andrew's? Yes. Andrew, would you like to come?
Want me to come up to the
That's very on the podium.
Yeah.
Okay. Then do I just indicate to you then if I want to change the slide? Does that work or?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'm making it as PDF.
Okay, do you want us to come back to you?
Yeah.
Looks for that.
Do you want me to send you?
Sure. Okay, sorry. So we can go to Leslie Robinson.
Hi, Leslie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Howdy. Howdy. I'm Leslie Robinson. I'm chair of the Grand Valley Citizens Alliance. We've been in existence since 1997 when oil and gas moved into our area, most likely the natural gas industry, because since I've been here since 1975, I've seen the exit of uranium, oil shale, coal mining, and right now the local natural gas industry, well, let's just say the prices aren't favoring a wide expansion that we saw 15 years ago. We are facing, though, many of the infrastructure that was built in the boom times are now 10 to 20 years old. And some of that equipment probably needs to be replaced. So I want to give you a little bit of history Union Carbide used to have a big mill down by the Colorado River just south of us. And it was known as a Yellow Cake town, along with Yerevan, Nukla, Natarita, and Grand Junction. And they used to have unlined ponds for slime settlements and waste solutions stored at the mill sites, and this was alongside the Colorado River. There, I don't know if you were aware that atomic bomb blast was set off in Rulison in 1969, and then also north of us in Rio Blanco as well. And guess what? The natural gas coming off of those blasts were radioactive, and they had to burn it off. How does this relate to oil and gas produced water treatment today? And I just want to say that how we are looking at treating the water today may not stand the test of time if we're looking at what happened with uranium. It wasn't until newer regulations in oil and gas came to play, thanks to some of the activists here in the room, that companies used to be able to bury the black plastic tarps holding mud, flacking fluids, produced water at the site. And so there will be many a surprised new landowners in the future as they dig a foundation for their home site, because these locations where the tarp was buried is not marked. Also, getting back to the naturally occurring uranium in Western Colorado, especially in this area, it's been established that production water can contain some radioactivity. And just out of curiosity, GVCA purchased an inexpensive Geiger counter. And for the past 2 years, we've been going out in the field, kind of testing around straight on public property or public roadway, not going on any private leased property, I want to emphasize. We have picked up some radioactive indications. And so we are going to invest in better equipment and do better training to find out what is the radioactivity that we are finding out in out in the DICs and where oil and gas is mined. Because of these health unknowns of oil and gas development here in Garfield County and in the Rifle area from all the different various industries, we need to keep produced water treatment plants and ponds away from DICs, away from people, away from water sources, protect our air quality. And I challenge you all to look into radiation testing requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments.
Dwayne Knudsen.
Going online.
I don't know.
Dwayne Knudsen.
I don't see a Dwayne online. There is a PSR Colorado. Could he possibly be with PSR?
No.
Where's Dwayne?
Okay,
Okay.
so we'll move on.
Andrew, are you ready?
I believe so.
Welcome.
Apologies that I couldn't do, but thank you so much for allowing me to share visuals. Hopefully.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. And like I said, I'll let you know when to change the slide. All right, thank you all for having me. My name is Andrew Closter, and I am a Colorado field advocate and an optical gas imaging thermographer with Earthworks. For over 10 years, Earthworks has deployed optical gas imaging cameras here in Colorado and in other states, both nationally and internationally, to document emissions from facilities throughout the oil and gas supply chain, including produced water storage, treatment, and disposal facilities. Our experience has demonstrated that emissions, both intentional and unintentional, are a pervasive concern at facilities that handle large volumes of wastewater. This is why in our comments submitted to the ECMC during the produced water rulemaking, we indicated our support for the legislative mandate that prohibited the construction of new centralized produced water facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. Our concern since the beginning really of this process has been centered around how do you balance the goal of protecting freshwater resources with the reality that encouraging produced water reuse potentially yields air quality impacts. And the least we can do is to ensure that those impacts are not endured by communities that have vulnerable populations already overburdened by environmental harms. So, as you know, I prepared a few slides today that I hope will illustrate some of the common observations that we make at facilities where produced water is stored, treated, and or disposed of. So on this slide, you're going to see an animation that's pulled from a video that we captured using our optical gas imaging camera. Our cameras are designed to visualize airborne hydrocarbon compounds, including BTEX compounds such as benzene and toluene, along with other volatile organic compounds. In this video, which is looping, we see a number of produced water tanks on a disposal facility in Brighton, Colorado, that is located in a DIC and is also located just a few thousand feet from a mobile home community. We also see in this video, or what you're seeing, is an uncontrolled release of hydrocarbons into the air from the vent stacks on a few of these tanks. So really importantly, this is an intentional release of pollutants, not a leak or a malfunction. The tanks on this facility are not required to control these emissions, and so when the tanks are overpressurized from vapor buildup, they are allowed to freely vent these vapors into the atmosphere. This is not an uncommon sight at facilities like this that store large quantities of produced water, even those located in the Front Range ozone non-attainment area or in the DIC. All right, next slide. It is also important to recognize that even if a facility is not freely venting produced water tanks, there is always the potential for dirty or faulty hatches and valves to result in unintentional emissions. So on this slide, we're looking at the tanks on one of the produced water treatment facilities that's just a few miles down the road here near Anvil Points. The valves and the hatches on the tanks in this facility are checked monthly for leaks. But just in the last 12 months, we have observed 3 separate instances of unintentional emissions leaking from the hatches on these tanks. And when we see something like this, we notify the Air Pollution Control Division, the operators notified, and oftentimes this results in repairs. But it's the frequency of these occurrences that is really important to highlight. So these are just 2 videos, and I want to keep within the 3-minute time limit, but I wanted to just illustrate, as I said, some of the numerous examples that we have documented of emissions related to the storage of produced water. And hopefully this helps lend a little bit of clarity as to why we believe protecting communities from the impacts of these activities is of the utmost importance. So thank you all, and I'm happy to discuss further with any of you who might be interested.
Thanks.
Lauren Swain is our last public commenter.
Lauren Swain.
Oh, that's right.
I think Lauren might be PSR. Is that you, Lauren?
That's correct.
That's
Great.
me, but I don't, my video is not going live. Oh, there it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before the commission today. I'm Lauren Swain. I'm coordinator for PSR Colorado, the Colorado chapter of the National Organization Physicians for Social Responsibility. We are health professionals and allies working to advance policies and practices that protect public health from the climate crisis and from exposure to air and water pollutants from oil and gas and to radionuclides and other toxic substances. The definition of produced water from HB 25-1242 includes chemicals that are introduced to the geological formation that return to the surface with oil and gas and includes flowback water. So when considering how to manage, store, recycle, and repurpose produced water, we ask you to consider the following when you evaluate the risk to the health and safety of affected local populations, especially disproportionately impacted communities, and consider the ability of the state and local first responders and health professionals to address any health and safety impacts. from accidents, spills, et cetera, that should occur in relationship to this management, storage, recycling, and repurposing. Our new comprehensive data analysis report entitled Oil and Gas Chemicals Still Secret in Colorado was released on May 20th of 2025. That was released by Positions for Social Responsibility National and our state chapter, PSR Colorado, as well as the Colorado Sierra Club and Frac Tracker Alliance. This analysis finds that Colorado lacks a record of the chemicals used in drilling and hydraulic fracturing for approximately 60% of those wells subject to the disclosure law passed in 2022. In other words, our state lacks a record of the chemicals introduced in about 675 out of the 1,114 wells that are required to disclose. The implications of this are far-reaching, but most importantly, we cannot determine whether or not operators are complying with restrictions on the use of PFAS chemicals, which epidemiological studies have found associated with higher levels of liver disease, kidney disease, adverse reproductive and developmental outcomes, and cancer. Our report reveals widespread noncompliance with the Colorado Oil and Gas Chemical Disclosure Law, HB 22-1348, enacted in 2022 to protect public health by banning toxic forever chemicals in oil and gas operations and ensuring transparency about chemical use. The report indicates that if the law were enforced as intended, operators could face an estimated $37 million in fines for failure to disclose, and that of the 31 companies operating these wells, 20 or 65% had no chemical disclosures appearing on the state's website. So based on the best available data, it appears that at least 30 million pounds of chemicals injected into over 600 of the state's oil and gas wells during the first 21 months covered by the law should have been disclosed, but were not. And industry giant Chevron and its subsidiaries PDC Energy and Noble Energy together operate 377 or more than half of the 625 wells with no chemical disclosures. So really, how can you protect these local populations when you don't even know? When our state, despite its best efforts to pass a rigorous legislation, regulations, we're finding that, these chemicals were supposed to be disclosed, are not being disclosed to the public, and these disclosures and record of the chemicals used are not available for over 60% of the wells that should be providing it. So how can we really, treat, prevent, mitigate the harm that can be caused to local communities in proximity to facilities for storage or living near places where that water is repurposed or reused? So we just need everybody to know that this report exists, and I'm happy to share it with you. I will put, I don't know if my chat is just, there it is. Nope. Let me put the link in the chat. And here's our press release, for example. And
Says send it to me.
Yeah, if you just want to send that to Hope, then she.
we will.
So thank you for.
We'll send it to you. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Appreciate you being here.
And that's everyone that's signed up.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm not signed up, but I live in the area of between Lewis and America. I have a minute to speak my perspective.
Sure.
Okay, so I moved here.
And I need you to come up.
And if you can state your name.
My name is Michelle Brower.
Thank you.
So I moved here in 2025. My property contract stipulated that I needed to do my due diligence. And
Speak up. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Okay, I moved here in 2025. I'm a landowner up on 229 Road between Lewison and Rifle. When I moved here, my contract specified that I should do my due diligence to find out what the impact of the industry was on my personal health and my property. Only thing I could find out, because the mission of the ECMC was in place, but the applications were not, was that the mission said that they were going to protect human health, welfare, and wildlife habitat. I was naive enough to believe that they would actually do that, which they have not. From my house, which overlooks the valley, I see a landscape littered with oil and gas locations. I see scarred slopes completely surrounding me from pipelines. What I didn't know is there's a produced water facility a mile up above my house. What I didn't know was that Tara had a location, and they are my neighbor, every quarter mile on their property. What I do know now is that I am a resident of EIC, that the percentage that I'm dealing with water contamination and the resources up near me are in the 90 percentile. The air that I'm breathing is in the upper 60 percentile for not good. And I feel like this industry is turning this area into a toxic waste dump, and I'm sick of it. And I'm tired of having to speak, make public comments, and do whatever I can to have you have things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Public comment? Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Aaron Sidlaco is going to provide us a little presentation on deliverable 9 with some of the literature review that she completed on identifying toxicological and analytical methods for treatment of produced water with potential beneficial use outside the oil field. Again, I'll remind the consortium members that this was a literature review. So this is the first step. So the baseline information for discussions. So this report is due to the legislature July 1st.
Right.
So, this is our final draft. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, thanks. Hi, good morning, everybody. I guess afternoon. And thanks for being here. That was a great public comment session, and it's really nice to see so much engagement out there. I'm sorry I can't be there in person on the Western Slope, but I hope you all enjoyed the tour and the pizza. Today we're reviewing, as John said, the final draft of our report on analytical and toxicological methods in produced water and what that might mean for possible reuses outside of the oil field. This third and final draft is the culmination, easy for me to say, of months of hard work, feedback, and collaboration from all of you. So here we go. Just to set the stage, you'll remember that our work comes directly from House Bill 23-1242, where we were tasked with evaluating the methods used to analyze and treat produced water and to look at how these tools could apply if produced water is considered for uses beyond the oil field. It's been a long journey. We started with an approved approach in February and reviewed the first draft in March and the second draft in May, and now here we are at our final review before the July 1st deadline. This is actually the third time you're reviewing this report, and we really couldn't have gotten this far without your expertise and commitment, and just really want to say how much I appreciate all of you. Next slide. You'll remember our main goal here was to find out where the knowledge gaps are. To do that, we reviewed over 200 articles, interviewed subject experts, and looked at case studies relevant to our research objectives. We also made sure to include your feedback and public comments along the way, and added a bit about economic and technical feasibility in this last draft in response to that. I did recently receive a comment about adding a few caveats to that new economic section, and I will do that. And importantly, I think our findings after all of this are consistent with the other produced water consortia across the country. So the gaps that we've identified here are pretty widely recognized. Also, I want to remind everyone again that we're not making recommendations or commenting on any sort of implementation of reuse here. It's just a straight literature review. So really what we need to do as a consortium today is to look at these findings, which are really the biggest knowledge gaps that emerged from the literature. Finding number one was incomplete characterization. As been mentioned earlier in our meeting today, one of the biggest things we found is that produced water is still not fully understood. I'm just going to read directly from the executive summary findings, but please know there's a lot more detail later in the report. So finding one is a knowledge gap regarding the incomplete characterization of produced water. A significant portion of produced water constituents remain unidentified or poorly characterized, with standard analytical methods available for only about 25% of the known chemicals. This knowledge gap complicates risk assessment and regulatory oversight. Lack of toxicological data is key finding two. We also found that there's a lack of toxicological data for many of the chemicals in produced water. The executive summary says toxicological profiles are incomplete for many produced water chemicals, and the health and ecological effects of chemical mixtures and transformation products are not well understood. Finding three is insufficient guidelines. Most of the current guidelines for water reuse are based on municipal wastewater, not on produced water. The executive summary states existing guidelines for water reuse are often based on municipal wastewater and do not adequately address the unique contaminants found in produced water. There is a need for updated standards specific to produced water. Key finding four is about analytical and detection limitations. Our current analytical methods are good at finding the chemicals that we expect, but they can miss unknowns or transformation products that could be important. And the report highlights the need for broader, non-targeted approaches. The executive summary states current analytical methods focus on known contaminants, potentially overlooking hazardous unknowns or transformation products. Broader, non-targeted screening approaches are needed. And our last finding is about additional knowledge gaps. You all raised some important points about other areas that needed more research. These include legal and ownership issues, economic feasibility, mapping discharge points, air emissions, energy use, spill response, environmental remediation, social and environmental impact, and the potential for resource extraction from produced water. While these topics are beyond the scope of this report at this time, they're definitely on the list for future investigation. To sum up, we know the produced water is complex and variable, and there are still gaps in our understanding, especially around toxicological characterization, regulatory guidance, and social, economic, and environmental impacts. We also identified through our discussions a need for more Colorado-specific data for our consortia. I think this literature review report gives us a good understanding of what analytical and toxicological methods are out there and what people are doing in terms of potential outfield reuse. And I think it gives us a good idea of what we don't know. Our main objective was to identify and document where the knowledge gaps are, and I think we've done that, and we've done that together. Your feedback has been included at every stage of this report, and our findings are in line with what other groups across the country are seeing. And I do hope that this report continues to encourage open discussion, ongoing input, and additional research. And with that, I'd like to open the floor to you all for discussion and hope we're ready to move forward to meet our legislative deadline. Thank you. John, I'll pass that over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Sidlato, and appreciate the work that you and everyone has done on that literature review. The consortium members have any comments or questions associated with the final draft, understanding the findings associated with it are conclusions of the consortium itself, without a conclusion of the literature that consortium reviewed as part of this literature. So,
Logistical. Is there a library list of articles?
yeah,
It's in the book.
Thanks, John. This is Mike Freeman, and Aaron, thanks for all the work that went into this report. I think it's a really valuable and useful resource. And I appreciate you adding caveats to the new section on economics and cost. I think that will be valuable. I just had one really minor wordsmithing point. I don't know if it would be helpful. I can talk to you offline, or if you call it up now, we can do it pretty quickly if folks are interested.
but I think
Isn't it your, sorry.
you can identify it now. I do want to make sure that the consortium has a consensus that we're good with this at the end, and so while we may not wordsmith it right now, you better identify to the consortium what you're suggesting.
Sure, no, it's on page 10 of the file report, there's a statement that says, according to Scanlon, the total annual volume of produced water in several key plays was roughly equal to 60% of the United States daily freshwater consumption. I had to read that 3 or 4 times to figure out. It seemed like the first 3 or 4 times I read that, I was struck that the volume of produced water coming out of these formations seemed enormous compared to what our national needs were. And once I read it, it's accurate, but it's comparing annual produced water to daily freshwater consumption. And I was just going to suggest we add a parenthetical somewhere in there saying, i.e., I did the math, it comes out to be like 0.1% of annual freshwater consumption, just so we're clear in comparing apples to apples on that page. That's the only suggestion I had.
Yeah, I think we can add that parenthetical at the end. I think it was 0.016%. I can definitely throw that in there. Yeah, I'll throw that in there. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Anybody have any cards in that? Okay. Any others?
I wanted to, Hope Dalton, Director. I wanted to make a comment towards Jolie. So for the people who are using a printed copy of the report in the room, it's a safe paper. None of the appendices and references were printed. So that's why you can't find them. They are available online and emailed to you. So you're not going crazy.
Today.
Today.
Not about.
And we're keeping, with the parenthetical note, we're still keeping in the roughly 60% of the United States daily freshwater consumption, because I'd like both figures for comparison.
Yeah, just as long, I think that maybe the cleanest way to do it is just to add a parenthetical, make the comparison.
Okay. Other comments, or are we good with the report? Does anyone have heartburn or want to see it move forward? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Rick.
Chair Minister Rick McCurdy, in one of the seats for experience and expertise in produced water. Could we, in the key takeaways, make some mention that the data research is focused on a raw, untreated produced water, and that if we were going to use water outside of oil and gas, it would not be that water. And we need more research into what constituents are in a desalinated produced water, because a lot of the chemistries, transformative products will not make it through the desal process.
Let me ask first, Dr. Sidlato, thoughts on that. My understanding is that the findings were pulled directly from reports. So if the reports say that, then I think it's fair for the findings to say that. And I don't think we can supersede what the reports say if they say something else.
And
Yeah.
I understand that the problem we have is we have about 15 years worth of research papers focused on raw produced water. And we're just now, in the last year or two, starting to see papers come out of universities looking at desalinated produced water.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I think it's an important distinction. And, you know, the longer we study these things, the more terms get jumbled, I think, a little bit. The definition of produced water in the House bill is what we had to use, which includes flowback water. I mean, certainly in the scheme of things, people aren't going to use salinated raw produced water to irrigate crops or something. They're going to remove the salt first. But to ignore that as, I mean, the major component of produced water, to say that we're only going to look at desalinated water, I think misses the point of what we were trying to accomplish here.
And I agree with that, Aaron. And because I'm not disagreeing with any of the information that's in the report, you did a wonderful job here. All I'm saying is just some caveat in there that goes, this water would not be the water that would typically be used outside of oil and gas operations.
What does other folks think? Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, James.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, 1 second, Thomas. We're gonna have James speak first, and then I'll go to you.
Yeah. I mean, I joking TWPC report. This has always been kind of this raw versus treated, and yeah, I mean, the bulk of the research to date is on raw. Very recently on treated produced water. Most of the bulk of the literature is on raw produced water or minimally treated. So I think it would be a good idea to add that caveat that this bulk of research, or to say something that this isn't ultimately what would be theoretically put to the environment. It's not treated produced water. Evaluation methods, a lot of the methods being developed are on the raw, and again, not this highly treated water. So I think that'd be appropriate to add something in there and say something along those lines.
I'm gonna go Thomas, then Floel.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Rick was suggesting. I strongly agree with Rick's suggestion, since that will ensure that we don't confuse treated produced water with raw produced water, since that the latter would never be reused outside the oil field. I think it's just very, very important, that we emphasize that even though, of course, raw produced water is full of toxic chemicals in high concentrations, but advanced treated produced water do no longer contain these toxic constituents. And it is the treated water that we are talking about from the perspective of either recycling or reuse. And so that's really, really important, that distinction.
Floel?
Cool. Then first, I just want to ask a clarifying question of Aaron. And I've read this report a number of times with many iterations. So I believe in the final report, there is within the body of the report a note that, reuse outside of the oil field would not be untreated. And if that's in the report, then it's, it can be brought into the executive summary.
So you're okay with bringing it up into that summary?
If it's reflected in the report already, and I believe it is.
Aaron, is it reflected in the report?
It is reflected in the report, and now I have heard the same comment 3 times. So to me, 3 is a significant number, and I think we'll put a caveat in there about untreated water.
Sorry, more caveats, because that's what we do. With the sort of, I don't know if it needs to be in the executive summary. I don't know if this should be reflected in there, but the value of the work to date can point to the efficacy of treatment. So it's not like we can start with treated water and be like, we're good. We just, I'm not sure if the nuance necessarily needs to be in there, but it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's important, Chloe. Thanks. I might use those exact words, actually.
Make me sound smarter, please.
Jolie Bronner, Environmental Justice seat. On what Joelle was saying, is there any way to recognize the range of treated water? Are they all treated exactly the same? Are they all treated? There's a range in there of what is treated, and then untreated is all the way on one spectrum, but it's a spectrum, and so that's why I just want us to be clear that not all treated water is ready to go on crops per se.
Yeah, I mean, again,
yeah,
let's be careful here.
That I-
Let's scope creep, because this, we're just pulling.
That's what I was worried about.
And it's kind of highlighting. I think that's captured in what Coel said, what you're saying.
I'm just concerned about schools.
I understand, yeah, I understand, and so. I don't want to get hung up wordsmithing this with two people. And so if everyone's pretty comfortable with the direction that it's going, and if anyone needs to reach out to Coel and Rick and James and Thomas, Jolie and Mike, then I'll be good with having her do that, just to get that wordsmithing done. So with that, I think Consortium agrees that this is the final draft with a couple of slight modifications. So I think you have your final draft in there, Dr. Silver.
Woohoo! Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Just for the record, I want to make sure and ask this question. Has your voice been captured in this deliverable? I'm seeing nods in the room. No one's raising their hand online, so I'm going to say yes, now you can clap.
Thank you for keeping that. So next up is a quick update from Kat Campbell, Science Advisor, Data Innovation for ECMC, on the ECMC form development resulting from the produced water rulemaking. This is really just an update on the timeline so that folks know how this is going to move forward and know potential points of engagement individually with ECMC. Go ahead, Kat, whenever you're ready.
I've just elevated her to a panelist. It might take her a second to get video.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Erin.
Welcome.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I will be overseeing the implementation of the new produced water rules for the ECMC. And today I've been asked to give an update on where we stand for the forms. Let's go to the next slide, please. So starting off, there are several forms that are directly impacted by the new rules. The first is the 2A, which is the oil and gas location assessment. The 5 and 5A, which are completion report and completed interval report. 7 and 7W, which are monthly operations. 47, which is quarterly reporting by location. And then a form that we are creating based on the rules, which is 48, and that has to do with the produced water credits. So we're trying to evaluate each of these forms right now and establish the changes in language and data that need to be incorporated into the updated form to capture the rules and regulations. Next slide, please. So the current process we're going through is internal within the ECMC. We are looking at each form, and we have a tracking software we're using called Asana. And so each team that is responsible for a form has a number of tasks to ensure that the changes that are required for the form are being captured by the form. So this, for example, is 47. So these are my tasks that I'm working on right now. So for example, the step that I'm on is the quarterly reporting by basin. So trying to establish how we define basins, assigning wells to basins, and then what the new template will look like for operators to report that. So really, the current status is that internal modification of forms, evaluation of the specific language of the rules, and how that will impact form development. Next slide. So where we stand, we are still working through the forms and template edits. We're hoping to have that done by mid-July. And then once that process is done and the actual terminology from the rules are incorporated into the forms, Erin and I will work with the consortium, with some consortium representatives, to be sure that the consortium's voice is heard in the form development process. After we meet with the representatives, we will update the forms based on that feedback, and then the process will continue. We'll review the forms with operators. We'll then update the forms. And once that process is done, and actually throughout this, OIT, which is the internal group that will be building the forms on eForms within ECMC. They will be building and testing the forms. So we have to have these forms in place by the first quarter 2026. But this is the rough timeline of what we're looking at for the actual development, the processes, feedback, and building and testing. So that is the update that we have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Anyone have any questions? Great, thanks for the update. The next step on our agenda is introducing the conversation. I've already done that, so I'm skipping that section. And so our next item is Jeff Kirtland, Christine Spansky, and Don Brennan, who's going to give us a presentation on technical considerations in citing centralized produced water treatment beyond production basin. This is the educational piece that we talked about earlier, and so we're going to have different folks providing different perspectives. We have a broad base of perspectives and understanding of the topic before we start kind of discussions on the topic. So, that Jeff, whenever you're ready, I yield.
Right over here, John.
I see you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kirtland. I'm a representative from the Piceance Basin Consortium. And again, thank you for visiting the Piceance Basin with the Consortium members. I hope those that were able to attend the optional tour learned a lot about how operations occur here in Piceance in this part of the state. Many operators who produce natural gas in this part of the state have a history of recycling produced water. I think you saw that with this facility and how long it's been in operation. You'll hear a little bit more details. The many companies that came before TEP, before QB, excuse me, and the current companies, really work closely with local governments, with members of the community, with the regulatory agencies to really make these facilities happen. So if you go to the next slide, please. So today, really, our goal is to continue to educate, working with members on the dynamic issues surrounding reduction of fresh water and the use or increased use of recycling fresh water. And what better way to do that than to visit the best side of the state, the West Slope. So thanks for coming again. Appreciate it. Today's presentation really will discuss at a high level the technical considerations for locating centralized storage treatment facilities in the Piceance, and to really adequately do that and accomplish that goal, I've invited colleagues with technical expertise to provide that information. So really, in the interest of time, I know we've got a lot of information. I want to introduce Christine Spansky, the integrity management and advisor from QB, who will provide some information, and then Sean Brennan, who's our environmental manager at TEP. And then once they're done, before we take questions, we're going to invite Carmia up to talk about the BLM component, and then we'll roll into questions there. Just so I'll have Christine come up.
All right. So busy slide. I just want to start out. I know there's been some changeover with consortium members. In April of last year, 2024, we actually did a more complete geology and hydrogeology presentation about the Piceance Basin. So please feel free to go back and look at that. I'm just going to talk about this super high level because there are some people, some geologists that literally study this their entire careers. So we're just going to do extremely high level. Over to the left, and I may just wander around up here. So just warning you about that. It's a general map of the Piceance Basin, including the surrounding areas that are geologically kind of lumped in when you start to look at the producing basins. For instance, here we have the basin itself, but there are some surrounding areas like the arch. Earlier, we were talking about the hogback, where you can see some of the producing formations exposed. Basically, it's all kind of the same province, even though some of those areas aren't in the basin itself. Thank you. That works better, I can see. Hey, okay. So the second one, this is the stratigraphic chart for the basin with the Piceance Basin here on the right-hand side. And it actually reaches across that Douglas Creek Arch into the Uinta Basin.
Geologists are complicated and they change names from place to place to, make everybody confused, but also to show that there are some different characteristics, but that you can then go back and later identify where you have those overlaps and similarities in the stratigraphy of the area. And so here, you'll notice these little symbols here where you have gas production, significant oil production, and then also source rocks. You'll see that pretty much all the way to the surface here, you have some evidence of source rocks, oil or gas production. That's pretty much throughout the Piceance Basin and over in the Uinta Basin as well. So we talked about this last April. This is a super big picture history of the Earth type thing, but right where this was deposited, you can see the Piceance Basin over here in this little green box, kind of the edge of a big sea. We talked on site this morning about the pancake rocks, the kind of braided stream systems, kind of meandering around, depositing little sand beds. That's why you have it, because it's right near the edge of the ocean at this point in time. And then when you start getting over onto the east side of the state, you'll see those are going to be different rocks because they're deeper out in the ocean. So just kind of know that things were constantly changing during this time. That creates different source rocks, different types of grain sizes, a lot of unique site-specific things to look at. And then we get all that nice deposit, flat, slightly inclined, and then we jumble it all up. And so that's where things get really different across basins. And so you'll see some areas you create these large basins, and then in other areas that rock is completely gone because it's been eroded over time after you disturb that. So that those tectonic processes add further change into the whole system that complicates it. So a couple things to highlight on this slide. Different depositional environments can create different rocks, and they have different reservoir properties. They're all truly specific to that system. You're never going to have the same rock in two different places. And then we have that geologic and tectonic history, and that influences how companies develop these resources. Next slide, please. Okay, going to get a little bit more in depth here. So why are there differences in water productions between basins? Again, a very complicated situation, but it comes down to how mature those reservoirs are. And you can see here, this is our geologist at the company put this together for me. Everybody's seen a glass cup of water, and how on the edges that water kind of comes up on the side and kind of sticks to the side of that. We have the same thing with rocks. So you'll see here, right around each of these, you're going to have little bits of water that are really hard to move in this system and out of this system. But all the water outside of that is water that can be moved. So this blue stuff is called irreducible water saturation. What we have in the Piceance, though, we have all of the red hatched water that we can actually move out of the system. So it's well above the irreducible water saturation. And we get that water produced with our gas production, whereas in other basins, you're not going to have as much water produced because it's harder for that water to move. And so that's why over in the eastern side of the state, you only get back 10% of what you put down there. So high level, right place, right time, right specific situation to be able to use that technology to recycle water. And we talked about this before, but Piceance Basin, this is kind of what we're looking at. We have single locations as opposed to out east where it's basically a big L shape. And you drill straight out horizontal, we drill out from the location and then drop down vertically to capture all of those formations because we don't have one continuous rock layer. Next slide. And so what makes the Piceance Basin better at recycling? This pipeline and infrastructure. You saw today, not only do you need pipes to move the water to limit those trucks because the communities do not want the trucks, you also need storage. Because of the amount of water you need to store that in preparation for the completions activities. So you need storage, transportation, pumping capacity near to your operations because you don't want to transfer it more than you need to transfer it. And so that kind of goes back to the other point I touched on the other side. You can't, in some bases, water cannot be produced on demand in high enough quantities for those well completions. So it comes back to that need for significant storage, planning, water balancing. Next slide. Okay. So this is the same map. I've just added all of the fun of topography into the system. We saw some of that topography this morning. These systems were initially started by that, working with the community, working with the agencies, working with the counties and municipalities. How do we get fewer trucks off the road? I mean, we all know that trucks can be loud if they're going past at night, there's dust. So that was the early stages over 20 years ago of the Piceance Basin and water recycling. Now, that continues to be one of the main goals. It's also driven by cost. It's more effective to move it through our water system. Doing the right thing, because we also don't like trucks driving around. The vast majority of my colleagues live out here on the Western Slope in and around this field. So everybody has pride in what we've been doing out here as far as keeping those trucks off the road, recycling as much water as we can, and then just operational efficiency. If you can get it there one direction, as opposed to multiple trucks going multiple directions, you want to do that. And so if we did not have our water system and we wanted to recycle or even use fresh for all these water, one of our completions would take about 3,375 trucks to get water to location. I'm not even looking at what happens after the well has been drilled and completed. We would also have to store that water because you cannot bring enough trucks in at the same time to be able to complete your operations effectively. And so you would need more storage tanks on location, and that would take more surface impact. Whereas operators out here have spent years working to try to minimize the size of the pad locations so that we can have the most limited surface impact. And so aside from all of that, just, we don't want the trucks out there, but think of the emissions and driving safety risks from all of those trucks if we had to now bring them into our system again, not being able to use our water facilities. And so that would be, I just did a super simple assumption, 50 miles one way. I can guarantee it's more than that one way. 337,500 miles just for one well completion. And so we want to have these systems in place out here. And that's all the operators out here. I mean, some of the smaller ones are working on getting their systems up and running, but the operators that have been here for a while, there are some people that say that operators will not continue to recycle. That's entirely false, because we will continue to recycle. It's most effective for costs. It's most effective for our entire system. And it's our way of working with communities out here. And it's just what's best all around. Okay. Thank you.
So this is a little overview of TEP specific system, and it brings to mind, it was a good question during the tour about whether we, as operators, intermingle with our water, and the answer is we don't. We have our separate systems. And for reference, see, we're rifles right here. We were kind of up in this area here for the tour, and you see our system goes up to the kind of other far. If you guys have crow flies, if you look straight to the west, pretty much from where we were, would have been looking at some TP equipment up in that western part of the northwestern part of the Piceance Basin over here. So lots of overlap, but separate systems. And we have successfully over the last almost 20 years implemented water share programs between operators where if we're expanding into an area where our infrastructure isn't there yet, but say QB's is, then we may approach them and say, hey, can we use some of your water effectively for our new development until we get our systems in that area? And that's what we've had many dozens of those water share agreements. I think are very successful in the last 20 years. And this, we have these two facilities here in that purple color are two big treatment facilities that look very similar to what we saw today in the tour, with dissolved air flotation units. These facilities have ponds for storage as opposed to the closed tanks that we saw this morning. But very similar in terms of the DAP treatment for sure. And these yellow squares are additional water storage facilities, which primarily consist of a tank battery, which may have gun barrel separation units to remove hydrocarbons before the water goes into specific ponds. I think all of these, definitely all of these have storage ponds associated with them, several of which are covered now. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail, as well as a way that we are drastically reducing emissions over the last couple of years on the storage facilities. Next slide. And so here's a kind of a bird's eye view of the two big facilities with the dissolved air flotation units in them. And these have been around since so Williams built these back in the kind of mid 2000s up to 2010 kind of time frame. And TP's operated them since 2016. Like re-emphasizing a lot of what we talked about so far today, is just the flexibility of these centralized facilities to be able to move, treat, and store significant quantities of water and get them where we need them for hydraulic fracturing. And we have fully automated facilities. So we saw some of that today as well as information, talked about safety features. We got a chance to talk to one of the operators, which is really, really great opportunity. People will talk to them as well. So they're manned, minimal impact to local wildlife, quiet, fenced in a lot of cases, like we saw today, away from popular areas. Next slide. Here's a little cartoon. May have quite a couple elements we didn't get to see today, but that are part of the kind of overall process. We start with wellheads. We get three-phase materials coming out of those wellbores. We have natural gas, condensate, or an oily fraction, and water. And we have, for TEP, we have this first stage of separation is generally on our well locations, where we're go through a three-phase separator. We have tankage with produced water and condensate or oil, and then that gets moved to these centralized facilities by all that extensive pipeline infrastructure that we've been talking about. Then we get over in here, this would be a typical facility like we saw today, where we have skim tanks, we're removing additional hydrocarbons, water goes on to polishing tanks, there was dissolved air flotation. We did hear some conversation around the emulsions and the kind of solids that gets generated from the dissolved air flotation that gets ultimately disposed of. And with this belt presses, you're going to concentrate those solids that come out of the dissolved air flotation. And then we saw today a storage tanks, and typically we have storage ponds that then we can then push to produce hydraulically fractured wells. And it was also discussed today about that balance between the need for hydraulic fracturing usually don't equal the production volumes. So there still is a balance of, and always will be, a disposal need for that water, typically in injection wells. We have those are sprinkled throughout the basin, along with that general pipeline infrastructure map that we looked at earlier, to help us manage the water needs throughout the entire system. We are able to also, all the horizontal section of that map is basically down here in the valley along I-70. We can push water all the way up to the area near where we were this morning, and vice versa. So we can move water through the entire system to get where we need to for hydraulic fracturing. Next slide. So this is by no means all inclusive. It's a really high level look at some of the permitting issues that are involved with these facilities. And a lot of this isn't unique per se to a produced water facility. The equipment that we looked at today are just, they're stationary sources of emissions. Like we have tank battery at a well facility, a compressor station. So it's just different pieces of equipment. They're all considered stationary sources and regulated by the Air Pollution Control Division. Primarily Regulation 3 is the permitting regulation, and Regulation 7 has more of the details around all the requirements for those stationary sources. And of course, we have ECMC is involved in the location analysis, in full cumulative impacts analysis. So this is just a few pieces of what an OGP involves with ECMC. We have local county governments that have their involvement in their processes. We've seen them change a lot over the years, a lot of integration and interest there. And they have some trigger levels that where they want more involvement to make sure that they're protecting the citizens in their areas. And it didn't include the BLM, but from here we'll talk about some BLM items as well. So we have a mix of locations between fee surface and BLM or Forest Service. So those federal surfaces would certainly trigger NEPA analysis for those. So lots of levels of analysis. Some basic things from ECMC, of course, like you would typically see folks submitting OGPs for new well production facilities. But we have TEP has successfully gotten approval for one new produced water facility a couple of years ago. I think that's the only one that's come through the ECMC specifically for a produced water centralized facility in the new permitting process. But very similar in terms of needing the various forms, reviews, presentation commission, public comment periods, and all the requirements that go along with getting that approval, running the facility, maintaining it in a safe, efficient manner, environmentally friendly, and forms that get submitted regularly. It's all very similar in terms of what you do for a well pad facility as well. And specifically, so we have a Form 15 is an earth and pit permit. Assuming we have a pit, that would be a required element for that facility. And if it is it's receiving fluids from multiple locations, it does trigger a Form 28, which is a centralized E&P waste management facility, which is what we did visit today. So there's additional requirements that go into place, additional environmental reviews from that whole process. When we get to the air world, I think Christian Messner asked the question on the tour, kind of about some of the air thresholds. This kind of gives you a little flavor for a typical air permit and the requirements. Any stationary source less than 2 tons per year of VOCs is not required to have a permit. And that's not just in our industry, it's across Colorado industries. As soon as you exceed that level, you need an air pollution emission notice, which essentially has each stationary source has a document where you are providing details around volumes of fluids that are going through the facility, emission estimates, using, in many cases, prescribed emission factors from the state of Colorado. If there aren't any, we can have proposed alternate methods of calculating those emissions. And then once you get to the 5 ton per year VOC, then you trigger either an applicable general permit or an individual construction permit. And Colorado has about 11 general permits, which cover certain pieces of equipment and criteria where you can submit your A panel on the general permit, get coverage with stipulations that are in that general permit, which speeds up the process for both the air division and for industry. In some of these facilities, we'd be able to use those for a tank battery, for instance, or we have an engine-driven pump or compressor on site, we can use some general permits. but the ponds for storage do not have a general permit. So those automatically trigger a construction permit process, which then in recent history has also triggered a reasonable variable control technology analysis by the Air Division, which we go through and basically do a cost-based analysis, cost-based and feasibility analysis to determine what's the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions at a location. And for TEP, that's come out in the last few years. The winner of that analysis has been covers on our ponds. So we have installed 5 so far. We'll be installing a few more in the next year or two, which has drastically reduced emissions from those covered ponds. To be determined how totally effective they are with long-term maintenance issues and so forth. I believe we are the first, certainly first in Colorado, if not first in the nation, to use a cover on a storage pond specifically for produced water. I know there's wastewater treatment facilities throughout the U.S. that have been successfully used, but first of it, kind of breaking new ground in Colorado. So we'll see how all that goes. Hopefully it continues to go as well as it has been for the last 8 months. So quick thing before I forget to, these numbers are applicable for the ozone attainment area, which is what we are in the west. Everywhere outside of the Denver-Julesburg Basin in the Front Range is in ozone attainment. If you're not in ozone attainment, these numbers go down, so the thresholds are low. You trigger higher permitting requirements at lower levels of VOCs when you're in the non-attainment area. So this is for over in West Oak, and this will go with those, but in the hierarchy is similar. Let's see. One other thing that's important to note too is, and we talk about the volumes of water are huge. You know, like 12 million barrels of water that are moving around constantly on an annual basis, but not through every facility. But we do permit based on the potential to emit. So those numbers need to be fairly high to allow for flexibility to have a lot of volume going through a facility or two to support drilling and completion activities, versus at the same time, there may be facilities that have almost no water going through. But if you look at the total potential to emit, that number is going to be a lot bigger than an actuals, which we report on annually to the Air Pollution Control Division, their emission inventory. So actuals versus potential, very different. Actuals is the important one to really look at when you're considering cumulative impacts and what are the current actual emissions versus what will potentially. So you pay emission fees as well and all that. Title V is an operating permit that's through the federal EPA, but administered through the Air Pollution Control Division. So when you trigger 100 tons per year of VOC, 25 tons of a total hazardous air pollutant, or 10 tons of a single hazardous air pollutant, triggers Title V level permitting, which is adds in a bunch of additional record keeping, reporting, sampling requirements, more scrutiny on those facilities with larger potential to emit. Let's see. And those ones always have an annual APCD inspection. Next, Wilson, there we go. Now I can breeze through these real quick. Talked about dissolved air filtrations before already.
It's important.
It's understood. Okay. I still didn't want to take it a lot because we talked about some of these already. This picture on the left there, just we didn't get a chance to see today, but we have an open pit. Just elements you'll see that are required as part of that Form 28 process with ECMC. We have dual liners with leak detection system installed, wildlife security and fencing, birds landing over the top. So we get an example of some items that are included when you elevate to these larger facilities that are part of the ECMC's requirements. Next slide. Similarly with the pits, we have biological treatment is a critical factor to help consume additional hydrocarbons, reduce odors. We have aerations, make sure we have the right type of bacteria in those ponds at all times. And here's a couple pictures on the right-hand side of some of our newly covered storage ponds. And from what we've seen so far, it's nearly 100% emissions reduced from which are typically from evaporation. One of the biggest sources is wind blowing over the pond and evaporating the hydrocarbons from there, which is totally limited to cover. So far so good there. Next slide. And then
Yes. All right.
Yeah, 2.5 minutes.
Okay, getting back to the topic at hand on CICs today. Just wanted to highlight the differences. I mean, I know you've heard a lot about the Front Range. Out here, those on the tour saw that there's not many people out where some of these facilities are. This is just highlighting the amount of federal service in the Rio Blanco County. This is based the areas that are currently within the rules and environmental screen. EnviroScreen 1.0, because that's what's currently in the ECMC rules. And so 67.4% federal service in Rio Blanco County in this area, and then 56.2% federal service in Garfield County DIC area. And so there's not many people out here because when it's not, oh, did I do something? All right. Okay, so we have a lot of federal land where we don't have residences. And then there's a pretty significant percentage of operator-owned land out here as well. And so it ends up being on the order of like 80% in both of these areas that cannot even have residences on it. So they're just vast amounts of land. So it's completely different and totally understandable in the Front Range where there's disproportionately impacted communities with extreme closeness to some of these facilities. And so most of these are uninhabited. Next slide, please. And so just highlighting the facility we went to today, we had talked about it on site. The closest building that is only seasonally occupied is 4 miles away. And then the nearest permanently occupied residential unit is 12 miles to the north. And so just highlighting how, in the rules themselves, there's a setback of 2,000 feet. And so here we are getting into the miles away from the nearest buildings. And so just highlighting some more about this facility since 2019, we've used it to frack over 213 wells. And we've saved about 21 million gallons of fresh water, eliminating over 600,000 truck trips just by using that single facility. And so there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the scale of these facilities, because I mean, our facility is big today, but it covers a lot of ground. And so we need to have those facilities where the operations are to be the most effective. Next slide. Right, just kind of recap. I'm gonna just breeze through this. Do you have anything? Okay. So we recycle out here and have for over 2 decades because it's best for the public, the surrounding areas, the companies, and the environment. We're gonna continue to do that unless we are pushed into poor positions with barriers or prohibitions on future activity. We've talked so many times about the different drivers in each specific location, what makes it effective for recycling. I did want to highlight, I talked about on location this morning, there are going to be some cases if you step out a little bit further or go to a different formation where you're not going to have the exact same systems in place and you're not going to have the exact same geologic or tectonic reservoir characteristics. So there's going to be certain situations where you're going to have a limited, but once you find all that information out, then you can start to build a program on it and start to build those systems. So, we talked about water interaction with rocks, limited water volume production on some formations, operational limitations. If we don't have that storage, it's going to be hard to recycle water, or we're going to have to use thousands of trucks to get out there. And then there's some cases, we'll get landowner feedback and we'll have to change the way things are going, because we want our landowners to be happy out here. And we do have some land use conflicts. If you have, and that's more so in the Front Range where you have multiple landowners in a small area. But we've got 20 years of history out here recycling. We want to continue to do that. We're very concerned that the prohibition is going to push us to change our operations. And that's what we're really concerned about out here. Does anybody have any questions? I know Jeff had some type of close.
Yeah, do we want to do the questions or?
I think we wanted Crimea, right?
Yeah, let's
Oh,
go
yes.
Crimea next. Yeah,
Okay.
and then we can.
And while we're on that, there's been a request for a bathroom break.
I don't.
You can pull up the next. There'll be a coup. I'll just stand here with.
Oh, it's water talk.
Okay, so I'm sharing with you the BLM perspective on how things have transpired with produced water management on the federal lands or associated with federal lands. Next slide, please. I'm Carmia Woolley, by the way. And I work at the Colorado State Office. So today I'm just going to briefly go over a few things. So BLM's mission, the legal framework. Before we get to play in the sandbox, we need to understand what the rules are. Typical resource and value concerns that we evaluate with produced water. One of those is water depletions. And then last but not least, I'll just highlight some opportunities or challenges depending on how you look at it. Next slide, please. Okay, so mission of the BLM is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. So we are trying to manage things for not only everybody here right now, but also future generations. So we're trying to do it sustainably, but it's a balancing act, right? We have multiple uses. Sometimes they drive really well, sometimes they conflict. It makes my job very exciting. Next slide. Oh, not quite yet. I do need to highlight though. So the BLM, we manage 10% of all surface lands in the United States. We also manage almost 30% of all mineral estates in the United States. So we are the largest federal land management agency. Now, when it comes to people, just acres, and most of that is in the 12 westernmost states. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the legal framework, if we go in chronological order, Mineral Leasing Act of 1920, that allows us to lease minerals. Then we have the National Environmental Policy Act. That's where we do environmental assessments. The Endangered Species Act, that's critical when it comes to produced water because we have several basins in Colorado that have teeny fish species and other species that require certain amounts of water. And so we have to report to the Fish and Wildlife Service our water depletions associated with oil and gas development, as well as other uses. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, believe it or not, that gave BLM purpose. We're searching for purpose until that moment in time. And then when it comes to our regulations for managing minerals, it's 43 CFR and parts 3160 and 3170. Next slide. Okay, so when we're talking about produced water, a lot of these resources and values are what we consider each time that we're talking to operators. So access and transportation, right? Without produced water treatment facilities, we have a lot more transportation. There's a lot more trucks on the road, a lot more like fugitive dust emissions. There's a lot more disturbance, right? Because there's going to be more kids that are created, don't have that. But on the flip side of things, right, in order to establish the infrastructure for produced water treatment, you need pipelines, you need roads. So it's an initial disturbance, but it's a long-term investment, right, to reduce continuous disturbance at multiple sites. We deal with air resources. A lot of people, even when we are visiting the treatment facility today, right, there are emissions. They're noticeable. You can smell them. We're human.
that is something that we deal with all the time. We are looking at where the nearby, the nearest residence is, as well as areas that are frequented by the public, right? We have recreationists, we have other land users as well. Socioeconomics, that is another common one, especially when it comes to disproportionately impacted communities. Fortunately, we tend to avoid leasing and developing oil and gas in their communities. Sometimes when there's drainage issues, meaning non-federal minerals are being extracted and thereby draining federal minerals, we will lease in those areas because we want a fair return to the taxpayer. Soils, kind of like with air, soils are definitely affected by disturbance. They're also affected by any spills that occur. And when you have more transportation, more truck driving, that ups the ante. Water resources, clearly, right, we're extracting minerals that have produced water. And in order to do that, we might need fresh water, or we could recycle and produce water. It's a trade-off. How do we want to manage that? And then there's wildlife. I mentioned teeny species in the rivers or the riparian areas, but that's not all. We also have big game, and we have greater sage grouse, we have venison sage grouse, we have all sorts of goodies out there. One last thing that I did not include is vegetation. We also deal with vegetation. That goes with disturbance, that goes with sensitive plant species. But just a broad spectrum of resources and values that we really think about each time we have a proposal in hand. All right, next slide. Okay, there's little fish that typically like go across the screen, but not getting the animation today. Okay, so I'm going to focus on one resource that I mentioned on that last slide, and that is water resources, and I guess also wildlife. So because we have water consumption associated with something that we produce, so that's oil and gas development, we have to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so Colorado has a few basins that report on, I guess, water depletions associated with oil and gas development. So these are the 4 basins. We are currently in the Upper Colorado River Basin. I'm going to focus on that one. Next slide, please. So the Upper Sea. So back in 2008, there was a programmatic biological opinion by Fish and Wildlife Service. Basically, there was a lot of development in this area at that moment in time. Right? It was at the height of oil and gas development in the Pecos. And there was a lot of freshwater use. But because everything was evolving so quickly, folks didn't necessarily have the information, the data to know what effect this was having on the endangered fish in the Colorado River. So the BLM prepared a programmatic biological assessment for the area, spoke with industry, got a sense of how much water was being used. At that time, it was vertical wells and then directional wells. We've talked about the S-shaped drilling, but it was really minimal at that point in time. So it was assumed that so many acre feet of water, fresh water, would be utilized to develop each well. Okay, fast forward about 10 years, and we received a notice of intent to sue on those assumptions that were really antiquated. Not only had things shifted from vertical, some directional drilling, it was either directional and then some horizontal drilling. Horizontal drilling tends to target the Niobrara Formation. It's deeper. It doesn't have as much water to use. So basically, all of the fresh water that was pumped down or had for hydraulic fracturing did not return. So vast amounts of fresh water were used for exploratory wells. Unlike the DJ Basin, right, is primarily focused on developing the Niobrara and horizontal wells. And it's definitely different from the Western Slope. We'll see that. There is some horizontal drilling on the Western Slope, but you'll see it's more like localized where it's located. So consequently, we did another PDA, and the Fish and Wildlife Service came out with a programmatic biological opinion in 2018, where we reevaluated how much water was going to be associated with water depletions in the Colorado River Basin associated with oil and gas development on federal lands. And you know, with the way things were going, we didn't have enough data to make assumptions about how much water was being used for directional drilling or horizontal drilling. We weren't sure if things were really going to shift to horizontal drilling like we were seeing in the DJ Basin. So we decided to attach downhole conditions of approval. This is what it looks like. So with each well completion, this has to be recorded. So freshwater use, recycled produced water use. So that way, right, we are defensible with what we report to Fish and Wildlife Service. And so while we consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we have a sense of what how much water was planned for use, right, long ago. And we're under that threshold, I think, largely because, right, when that was originally forecasted, we were at the height of development in this area. And we haven't seen that, right? We've been declining. We've also become much more efficient. We have water treatment facilities, right? And a lot of the operators do indeed reuse and recycle produced water. Freshwater tends to be used during drilling. Hydraulic fracturing, it's almost entirely reused and recycled produced water, which is awesome because that is where those large volumes of water are needed to pressurize that system to fracture the formations. Okay, next slide. Okay, so opportunities. Some people might also see challenges too, but I think challenges can be seen as opportunities. So really what we've seen through produced water management, and it's really through produced water treatment facilities and then infrastructure, pipelines, is we've reduced the truck traffic, the emissions, produced water disposal, overall surface disturbance, freshwater consumption, and then health and safety risks, right? Risks are huge. So on the right side, I have 3 bullet points that I would like everybody to be thinking about as we move forward. What opportunities we have for aligning with federal and state regulation. There's also local government regulation. So right now, with the way things are, you know, even on the tour today, right, the tour at a facility that can no longer be permitted if we were to try to permit that right now. And yet it serves both federal and non-federal oil and gas development. And so I know the BLM would really like to work with stakeholders to figure out, you know, a way that we can move forward. We can minimize or avoid impacts to disproportionately impacted communities. But it's a balancing act, right? So if we don't reuse and recycle produced water, we can't have these treatment facilities, then that means reverting back to freshwater use. On the Western Slope in particular, we are in a period of drought. And there's the Colorado River Compact, right? We're dealing with that right now. So things are really elevated and can get complicated really, really quickly. That's just an example. I could brainstorm all sorts of. So with that, really, the opportunities are, how are we going to plan and permit pipeline infrastructure and facilities? So typically that's by the BLM if it involves federal lands, and then ECMC. And then what are the unintended consequences while we're doing that? So right now we're dealing with I think an unintended consequence, right? Where we're trying to ensure that there's no unnecessary impacts to human health and the environment, right? But where we're at, I'm not sure we're meeting that, right? So we're facing an unintended consequence. If we require produced water reuse and recycling in areas of Colorado with formations that basically absorb water and don't flow anything back, are we going to have an unintended consequence of having industry drill into shallower formations that do produce water? Or are we going to be trading off other water uses? But so those are just a few things to be thinking about as we move forward. Like I said, I would love to hear thoughts, comments about unintended consequences and how we can align all the regulations and policy so that way we can all move forward confidently, safely for resident as well as the future. All right, that's all I have to say. Should we invite questions, comments?
Yes. I think we want to go to that and then so that, but and I know that you want to hear, thoughts about the consequences and such. I know that you really want to hear those in July.
Yes.
So if we could just take a couple of minutes, the folks that need to run to the bathroom, and then we're going to go answer questions so that the people that have questions about what's been presented so far will be able to have that.
Centralized water. These maybe, the one we saw this morning was far away from any people, like 12 miles from the nearest resident. The map showed where your existing water treatment facilities are. I'm curious, let's say over the next 5 years, where would you anticipate putting new ones if there are adjustments made in the DIC boundaries? And in particular, how far are those locations from those proposed locations or planned locations from RBUs or home? talking, are they all similarly remote or how far away are they?
I can speak for QB that, we are still planning with a new owner. But I suspect that they would probably move further north into areas that are not many homeowners. That's
sort of similar to what we saw this
Yeah.
And similar, and for TEP, like, we're building a new facility up in that area, not far from where we work today.
Thank you.
And then this is Harmony Cummings, and my question goes from years of conversations, what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from industry, government, and community. And those are different things. And what I'm really curious about, one of the things I heard most in making this legislation is concerns about the pits. We didn't see any pits today. So I'm curious how many pits are in use for your company. And then I heard also that the water is treated before it goes into the pits. Is that true for all the water? And to what standards, how much emissions comes off of that before it goes into the pits? And then I just wonder, two more things. What would happen if we took the OGI camera out there on the facility we saw today and on these pits that are currently happening? And the emissions that are being estimated, then our actuals are being put in afterwards at the state level. Who is looking at that comparison and how are those verified? I know that was a lot, but it all is encompassing when we talk about these emissions in the DIC conversations. And so just really curious, how many pits, where are those, what are those treatment facilities like, and what would happen? Because we saw the camera footage up there if we put that view on.
So I'll take the first part, the map I showed, you see the field for number of pits. So it's about 12 locations on that map that are pits with basic treatment before going into pits. And then we have the two facilities that were different color, that each one of them has, I think one has 4 pits and one has 2. And those bigger locations with the dissolved air flotation. So, and probably multiply that by the number of operators. I think you may have a few less pits, I think, than we do, 6 or 8 or so. So you're looking at a couple dozen total in the peons. And like I said, there's working with the air division, we're doing that reasonably available control technology analysis is determining what we do to control emissions at each location. Which is based on the estimated emissions, which is based on the amount of water we're moving, which is based on the size of the pit. Some of them are a little smaller than the tanks we saw today. And some of them are maybe twice as big as the tanks we saw today. Myriad of different setups we have that are all, and then depending on those various site-specific criteria, triggers different levels of analysis with the air division.
And from our perspective, some of our older facilities, we do have the storage ponds, some of which are covered, some are not covered. It is all DAP treated water that goes into those. Historically, what other operators did, I can't speak to, but what we do now, we use it for our treated water before we put it in the pits. As far as the air emissions, I cannot speak to that. That's more, we have an air team that manages that type of information, but we do have control technologies and monitoring and LDAR crews that go out there and look frequently for like things that we might have to fix. And I know we are big on making sure that tanks, even on production location, that feed hatches are closed. It's something that our air team is very, very big on mentioning in frequent safety meetings, on, hey, we need to be doing this stuff. We need to be watching it. So that, pits and ponds, like I said, there's been many different types throughout the years, but we're pretty aligned as operators out here that, covered is, we have several that even aren't in use right now that we don't have any water in.
I'm not aware of any, and the air division doesn't allow us to put pure, raw, untreated water into a pit.
Yeah.
Covered or uncovered. that water is gonna have some level of treatment before it goes into that storage pond.
How much hydrocarbons are allowed to remain? Is it like a percentage or?
But say if you look at our covered pits, oh, actually, it doesn't really matter. I don't have it off the top of my head what that dissolved number looks like. And I'm not gonna say it's insignificant. There certainly is a significant amount, particularly when you look at volume of water that's coming through a facility. So even if the concentration is low, volumes are high. So it certainly is a significant amount of emission, which is why we've done all the work, why the Air Division does all the analysis to ensure we're using the best technology to minimize those emissions. And covers have been, immensely improved that emission profile from the facilities.
And then can someone from the state answer my second part of the comparing of the estimates to the actuals and what happens next?
So that's a CDPHE question. We have Tessa that's on there. So Tessa, if you are comfortable taking a shot at that, that's fine. If we need to phone a friend for a future meeting, we can do that too.
Sure, I can cover a couple of things here. The first is that let's split this into two pieces: the Air Pollution Control Division and the Water Quality Control Division. For the Air Pollution Control Division, there are general provisions for all emissions in the state, including oil and gas, defining a lower threshold requiring a permit. Everything above that threshold requires a permit. The way that, to give a 2-minute overview of how permits are done for air, everyone that's going to emit from any sites, this isn't just pits, but really anything, has to submit what's called an APEN or an APEN, that's an air pollution emission notification, to the state. They say kind of what they're going to emit or have emitted and what numbers those are, like the hard data on that. If that number is below the threshold of the particular pollutant, then it does not require a permit and it's done. If it is above that threshold, then it requires a permit, and the APEN itself becomes the permit application and goes through our permitting process to establish that. And so something like these facilities for air permitting, they submit an APEN, it gets evaluated, and if the emissions are high enough, then it requires a permit. So it is regulated. It's a question of whether it's above or below that threshold, whether it requires a permit. In terms of Water Quality Control Division, now we're talking about whether there are discharges to the waters of the state. So if there are going to be discharges into those waters, and we're talking about tributary waters here now, right? Then that will have to be communicated with WQCD for a permit to do so. Prior to doing so, of what exactly that will be, what is the effluent, what is the exact composition, what is the composition of the water it's going into, because there is such a thing as discharging too clean of water into something and disturbing the environment in that state. You can actually harm wildlife by putting pure water or something like that into something that is not pure, right? You usually don't go and drink from a lake because there's more in there than that. So that's kind of where that combination comes. In terms of residual contaminants that are in a pit of some kind, that then goes to yet another division within CDPHE, which is the Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division. So it depends upon the nature of those contaminants, whether they are considered hazardous waste or solid waste, and how those are then disposed of afterwards. The Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division does handle produced water impoundments in those facilities, particularly on the Western Slope, and have permits associated with those for how the extra things that come off of it, because it has to go somewhere, are disposed of, because that division also handles all landfills and disposal facilities in the state. I hope that gives enough detail there.
I may make a recommendation. If there are future questions about CDPHE's role in this, then I would say that we should have CDPHE give a presentation at the meeting. So I want to focus on the people who are actually presenting here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a quick follow-up.
Hang on one second, Chloe, we'll go Irene and then we'll go Joelle.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious, I'm sorry, Irene Andrus. I'm curious why you would use a pit instead of a tank that's all today.
It's the volume and cost. You can store a whole lot more water at a lower cost in a storage pond.
I'm not sure that's a good reason because there's a lot more risk, isn't there, when you have a pond?
We would, like I said, we have engineered double lined ponds with leak detection. We're monitoring regularly. I'd argue that the risk is similar to having a battery of 6 huge tanks that could be equivalent to one lined storage pond.
So then why would you choose to do a tank?
You know, I think it really all depends on the design and the planning at the time the facility is kind of designed. Like when that decision is made, what is going to work best given the space that you have, given the future operations and planning that you have, and what you know at that time. And then with that, you also work with the agencies to see, you know, what would work best in this area. Because there are going to be some situations that they might prefer one versus the other. So it really, I mean, both are engineered designs, but I think it really depends on the operations of the company at that point in time. And you know what those plans are for the future and how they decide whether they decide on a pit or a tank. It really it's not like one easy decision to make that. And I have not personally been involved in planning at that time, but there's usually a team of people looking for the best option for what you need at that point in your operations.
Costly option.
Always costly, but yeah, I mean, it's a team, yeah.
Chloe?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first, can you describe what basic treatment is? You said that, you know, you have 12 locations that have basic treatment before going to piss.
A gun barrel.
Just a gun barrel, so
Yeah.
just separation.
And that was actually driven by even the air divisions changed their philosophy on these storage locations over time. And that was the minimum requirement 10, 15 years ago, was a gun barrel separation before going into storage pond. And that has changed. Since we've gone through this analysis with them, that's not enough for facilities going forward. And the one solution which we've chosen is to cover those ponds after also still going through a gun barrel separation process, also covering the ponds.
So existing ponds don't have just gone through, or they're still just going through gun barrels that you're putting a cover on it too.
Correct. And then there is a vapor collection system. If we do have any vaporization under that cover, those vapors get routed to an ECD buster as well, which to date we haven't had any of that. Actually, we've seen 100% vapor suppression underneath this cover, so no emissions.
And are you doing any monitoring around? But is there any sort of air monitoring down window?
But like Christine mentioned, we do part of our leak detection and repair program is regular monitoring. We're at these facilities monthly, the FLIR camera, making sure that the cover has integrity, good seal, making sure that the combustors function properly, any other auxiliary equipment, tanks, gun barrels, that are all leak-free. It's part of our LDR program.
You say leaks, and I just think water. I know you're talking about emissions, but now I'm thinking about water. Do you have any sentinel monitoring around these?
Well, so there's a double line system, slope to the middle, and there's a detection system, so you can see if the primary liner is leaking between the double line.
Gotcha.
And to add to the monitoring, many operators on the western slope here, we have regular flyovers and or satellite monitoring of methane emissions. So there's a lot that's happening. We also have universities and other entities, and the state does flyovers that we'll get a report back on. Infrequently, I know that what we do is if we were to find something, we'll call other operators if it's near our assets and we find no issue, we call the other operators in the area. And so we work together on quite a bit of stuff out here. So there's quite a bit of monitoring when it comes to methane emissions.
And does it all get recorded? Or do you just kind of know what's happening?
You know, I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of reporting, but then there's a lot of internal processes to say, okay, we saw this. Then they'll be like, hey, we were unloading or we did a braid and had 10, you know, so there's a lot of processes that work together, but all of those findings will go through our EH&S system.
And then the aerial flyovers are an example of us going beyond regulations. We're not required to do them. So therefore there is not requirements with that activity. But you know, we do have a plethora of other record keeping and reporting requirements associated with our LDAR programs. So when we find an issue, we document that we found it, that we fixed it, and have all those records. We document when we do well unloads. We blow down a piece of equipment, blow down a pipeline, blow down a meter run. All those records are kept and reported to the state and as part of the annual emissions tool.
And certainly if there's a reportable event.
Yes.
Then
Yes.
okay, we got time just for a couple more questions here. We got to keep them 20 some minutes behind already. So Commissioner Pinter, and then someone online.
Yeah, Tessa.
Tessa. So go ahead.
Tessa's question is probably better than mine. Okay, I tried to take notes because y'all presented a lot of great information. Oh, Emma Pinter, local government seat. In just taking a look at the review protocol for the pits, what I understood in how you describe the current standard is it's a cost and feasibility analysis. Are those the only factors that are required in the construction of how the pits are put together?
Well, emission reduction. So I mean, you want the biggest bang for the buck. You don't want to spend a lot of money on something that only reduces 10% of emissions.
Okay.
But if you can reduce, if you have a choice between technologies that both reduce 95% of your emissions, one costs $10 million and one costs $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
You pick the $1 million, right?
Okay.
And then may look different, like we said, depending on site situations of what's the right solution for that location. But that is really the crux of the analysis is how much is eliminating as many emissions as possible for the most reasonable cost.
Okay. Is there a threshold that's generally agreed upon that is the ideal emissions output or reduction percentage?
Not necessarily. It has been a moving target over the last handful of years. Kind of like you hear about the social cost of carbon, for instance, and lots of numbers that get thrown around with that. Similarly, in the VOC and methane worlds, there isn't necessarily consensus on what's the right number of like dollar per ton reduced per se. Part of the analysis, but not always agreement on exactly what that number is.
Okay. I do have like a couple of questions. I'm trying to be efficient about it. You mentioned your LD crews go out monthly and the flyovers and satellite monitoring and a number of different factors that help you have a sense from a corporate perspective if you're meeting your objectives. Which one of those would you be comfortable, or how many of those would you be comfortable being in regulation?
The majority of them already are in regulation. I think the only one of that is any of the aerial detection methods are not currently in regulation.
So like the satellite or the flyovers?
Yeah, those are not required at this point.
So why do you find them valuable?
They are probably one of the most valuable tools that I have. It particularly allows me to see. So my crews go out there to tend to be focused on the point sources of emissions, a tank battery, a compressor, a separator on a pad. And we have a lot of pipeline. That's gas pipeline, water and oil pipelines that go over a varied terrain. And those are not generally walked with a handheld camera, but I can see them from the air. So we find a lot of issues that we wouldn't otherwise have found by using the aerial detection methods.
Okay.
Very useful.
In looking over some of the video footage provided during public comment with the LD camera, do you have any feeling on if those inspections are a supplement to what you're finding or consistent with what you're finding? Or any opinions on like the public comment that was offered?
Yeah, actually, I know that facility, I have a record of a repair a few weeks after that footage was taken at that location. Operations are dynamic. So yeah, we go out monthly. Some things change, equipment, seals fail. So why we go as frequently as we do to ensure that we find things as problems arise and fix them as soon as we can. So we're not perfect, but we're doing our best to minimize future connections.
Okay. One last question that might just be, I'm still learning about this topic. You talked about the 2-ton VOC limit per stationary source. And I'm just kind of curious, when you talk about a battery of 6 tanks, is that each tank is a single source or the battery is a single source?
They'd be considered as battery. And that goes kind of back to the general permit concept. There's general permits for water tank batteries and condensate tank batteries. It's looked at as a whole. And it's not an individual tank base. It's a facility limit.
Okay. Those are my questions for now. Thank you so much for the really in-depth presentation.
Last question, Tessa.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a note on the tank versus pit conversation there, because we actually CDPHE works pretty closely with a lot of the folks that have all these facilities, right? And one of the other concerns we have, particularly on the West Slope, is unnaturally rapid erosion through water discharge. So this generally is stormwater, but we also look at it in terms of protections for catastrophic releases. A catastrophic release from a pit would take something piercing through a lot of layers of lining to get into the soil and would not happen all at once. A tank, on the other hand, can be a very large surface disturbance area because it has to be not only have the space to be there, but also all the protections around it so that it won't catastrophically release or have the ability for it to release into nature, right? And a lot of the contaminants in especially the mountain areas of Colorado tend to be geogenic. They're in the rocks themselves, and rapid erosion is what actually puts those in there, usually through stormwater of things like roads and things. There's a lot of water in those tanks. If it comes out, it's usually not going to be it's either going to be a tiny seep or it's going to be something really big. And so that's where that kind of stormwater and relative controls go in, is the kind of underground versus, or I said set into the ground versus above ground and how you get it there. So I wanted to add that on there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tessa. Thank you for the presentations, the information. Really appreciate the tour. That's not something that we take lightly, how hard it is to organize that and put us out there like that. So really appreciate you getting us out on the ground and be able to experience that firsthand. So thank you for that.
And also add good choice by Hope for all-wheel drive vehicles.
Weather could be a lot worse.
It's about to get worse.
So we're a half hour behind, so we're gonna try to move forward here a little bit. Next up is Stephen Aruza. Am I right? Yeah, I'm right. And then he's gonna give us produced water facilities and disproportionately impacted communities presentation. Stephen is the environmental justice liaison for the Western Slope for ECMC. I think Stephen is online.
I'm here.
Hey, Stephen, how are you? We're just pulling up your.
I can drive on my end, if that works for y'all.
You want to run it on your end?
Yeah, I'd rather share a screen on my end if that's possible.
Is that okay? All right. You're getting a thumbs up here.
Cool. Let's see, share. Is that showing up for y'all?
Not yet, but it's going to. Yep, you're good.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for having me. I am happy to be able to participate in this conversation. As I mentioned, my name is Stephen Arauza. I am the Environmental Justice Community Liaison for the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. And I've been asked to come in and kind of join the conversation to add some context to concerns that I've heard from members of disproportionately impacted communities, as well as community-based organizations in the work that I do for the ECMC. So a brief outline of the conversation that I'll have for the next 15 minutes or so is continued information on my background, followed by getting into concepts of environmental justice and DI communities. I'll touch briefly on the nature of produced water facilities, but you've got the experts in the room, so things have really been covered well today. And then get into concerns that have been expressed by the community with a little additional context using my technical background. As I mentioned, I'm the Environmental Justice Community Liaison for the ECMC. Prior to taking this role, I've actually spent 10 years as an environmental protection specialist for the ECMC. So that means 10 years of conducting inspections on facilities like this, of getting involved in the permitting process from the ECMC side on occasion, and primarily of handling spill response and remediation, working with operators, EH&S staffs to bring incidents back into compliance. So that means hundreds of projects expressed over thousands of forms. Additionally, outside of work, I serve as a member of the CDPHE's Environmental Justice Advisory Board, where I serve specifically as a representative of disproportionately impacted communities on the West Slope. So all of these factors sort of taken together makes me kind of a unique person to have in-house to inform some of the context to help guide this conversation or to inform your deliberations otherwise. So I'd like to start with environmental justice conversations by framing them in context of the Environmental Justice Act, HB 21-1266. My colleague Ronnie Kumar at the OEJ did an excellent job in covering a lot of these topics, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. The EJ Act does describe environmental justice in Colorado, and I kind of wanted to emphasize this section that states that all people have the right to experience equal protection provided by environmental policies, as something that's consistent with a lot of the concerns I've been hearing from community members. In short, folks in West Slope disproportionately impacted communities have concerns that they want to be able to experience the same protection afforded to DI communities on the Front Range. There are a lot of differences in the map and how things are applied, and I think a lot of that conversation has already been had. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. The EJ Act is also very important as a formal acknowledgement that less burdened communities have benefited from relationships that impose burdens on other communities. So the state's attempt to sort of define and map out these communities is how we end up with the term of disproportionately impacted communities. This red map is different from the CDPHE map. This is actually the ECMC's map layer. I believe that Christine used a version of our data and touched on the fact that this data comes from the May 2023 data set. As Ronnie presented in the previous meeting, CDPHE uses a November 2024 data set. It has significant differences, particularly for Rio Blanco County here, but ECMC is committed to updating the data that we use. This is what is used by staff, and we are planning rulemakings this summer to update the data set that we use to bring it into alignment with CDPHE's latest data. There are elements of the legislative definition here. Again, Ronnie really covered that very well. I just want to point out that the ECMC uses that entire definition. Looking at environmental burdens, and this information comes off of EnviroScreen 2.0, but it really is just intended to highlight the fact that the DI community definition from an environmental burden perspective focuses on communities that are experiencing environmental burdens defined to exceed the 80th percentile using that EnviroScreen system. 1.0 currently for ECMC, but we're going to update to 2.0 soon. A lot of these facilities or communities, as you see in the map, are focused on the Front Range. If you squint, there's a tiny one here at the G and Grand Junction. So the West Slope is not without communities that are defined experiencing that current burden. But if we expand our scope to look at the entirety of the EnviroScreen map, then you get a better idea of where the state has identified disproportionately impacted communities experiencing environmental burdens on the West Slope. The Environmental Justice Act makes several declarations. The one that kind of drives the work that I do is the second on the list here, stating that it is necessary for disproportionately impacted communities to be meaningfully engaged as partners and stakeholders in government decision-making. So in the last meeting, I believe my colleague Jessica Chavez introduced the work that we do as community liaisons. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I do also want to report out, since I'm elevating concerns that I've heard from communities,
folks have a concern that due to the significant volume of produced fluids associated with these facilities, as well as questions regarding emissions controls, this third bullet comes into play, which is stating that potential environmental climate threats merit a higher level of engagement, review, and consent. So we've been talking a lot about these facilities today. We've got the experts in the room who've covered it really well, and you guys have maybe visited one of the facilities that you see in these photos. They do come in a variety of configurations to suit the operator's needs and their purpose. What they share in common is that they facilitate the management of large volumes, hundreds of thousands of barrels of produced water, making them advantageous for the recycling efforts of operators and of regulators. On the West Slope, these uncovered pits are the most common, the stuff that you see here on the left. There are some facilities that decide to use tanks, and I think that was a really important conversation concerning, when operators decide to use one versus the other. As an inspector, from my perspective, tanks do offer a nice advantage of being able to conduct a visual inspection of a significant amount of the primary containment device, but of course these decisions are made at the business level. So the West Slope does lead the way in percentage of recycled produced water, and this has been captured in the past several iterations of the ECMC Director's report of the evaluation of cumulative impacts. This slide comes from Figure 5D of the 2024 report, and on the right side here, I want to call your attention to the West Slope, where it had been recycling 96% of water. That number is in the decline, and the ECMC report at least points to one possible source of this decline being that the OGDPs that were approved in 2024 were located distally from these types of facilities, so it made recycling of produced water more challenging. This is just a brief summary of produced water storage and treatment facilities. Others have said it better than me in the room. The goal of these things is to treat, store, transport large volumes of produced water. Critically, I think folks have touched on the need for diligent leak detection and repair to maintain equipment integrity. This has to do with the corrosive nature of the fluids involved, as well as the exposure to the elements. So it's important to keep in mind with these facilities that every piece of equipment on them has a shelf life that's recommended from the manufacturer, and that most of these pieces of equipment also have to contend with things like pressure and temperature cycles, exposure, and corrosion that makes them subject to potential failure. And it's important to think about what these facilities look like 5-10 years down the road. So now, getting into concerns that I've heard from members of the community. So as folks are typically concerned with these operations, traffic safety comes first to mind. Obviously, if a facility is located in close proximity to residential areas, then they experience an increase in traffic potentially during all phases of the operation, from construction to reclamation. Operators are also challenged with preventing access from members of the public, as some of these facilities present inherent risks, as well as preventing access from wildlife, livestock, things like that, while also providing egress corridors and corridors for emergency responses during upset conditions. With the use of increased truck traffic and heavy equipment, there is also a concern for increased road wear where public roads are involved. Folks in communities are obviously concerned with protection of their water resources, be it groundwater or surface water, waters of the state in general. This photo on the left represents a produced water storage facility. This is a pit with a capacity for 400,000 barrels of produced water located in Rio Blanco County. You can see in the photo that it's also pretty close to Peons Creek. This was a case where the worst case scenario described by Tessa did occur, where during routine operations, the liners were compromised, resulting in the loss of an unknown amount of produced water into the subsurface toward the end of last year. The red lines on the figure represent the presumed groundwater flow direction, which is toward the creek. The operator is working quickly to control this situation and continue to investigate potential impacts and potentially remediate these instances to bring back into compliance, but it's a process that takes time. The photo on the right exemplifies that issue as well. This is from a flow line release incident that occurred in 2016. Produced water facilities obviously can use subsurface flow lines to move significant volumes of water, millions of barrels, as was mentioned in this meeting today. And there is a potential with great volumes of water for significant impacts to groundwater, in which case a lot of the cleanup can take decades to really restore that groundwater. The figure here depicts the presence of liquid phase hydrocarbons on groundwater in yellow and orange here. The shape actually stretches for about a half a mile with the question mark up top because this was an early figure. In addition to liquid phase hydrocarbons being entrained in produced water, there's also a dissolved phase of hydrocarbons that tends to travel much more quickly and much further. In this case specifically, we see the half-mile plume of liquids. The dissolved phase plume actually impacted the surface about a mile away, a little over. It actually crossed from Garfield County into Rio Blanco. And again, this is a 2016 event for which cleanup is ongoing because it takes time to remediate these situations when you have large volumes of produced water. Folks want to protect the surface as well. This is due to the known chemistry of produced water. So we talked about the saltiness of the water. Here on the left is a stiff diagram. It's a visual representation of water chemistry, particularly of the saltiness of water. You can think of it that way. The blue figure at the top represents a seawater sample. The red figure coming down from there is a produced water from a formation in the DJ Basin. So again, this is an East Slope example. Down at the bottom, you can see a skinny sliver of a figure. That's an unimpacted water well in the Laramie Fox Hill aquifer. And this green figure in the middle is actually the neighbor whose well was impacted by nearby operations. So you can see from the differences in shape that the salinity of this figure has been impacted by influence of presumably produced water. The images on the right here represent upset conditions. So this is what it would take to really expose vegetation to the saltiness of the water. This was a pipeline explosion that occurred up north of Parachute in 2019. And in fact, it impacted several acres of the surface, including an irrigation ditch, which you can see on the top right here with condensate on it, as well as impacting Parachute Creek. The photo on the top left here just shows the hydrocarbons and produced water staining the snow that was on the ground, as well as the surface vegetation. This occurred, I believe, in January of 2019. So that was known chemistry. Of course, we talked a bit today about the unknown constituents and potential toxicological effects of untreated produced water from key findings of the analytical and toxicological methods. In conversations with folks who are unfamiliar with produced water, the unknowns are also a significant concern to community members. Folks in the West Slope are well familiar with the issue of geologic instability. The photo on the right is pretty spectacular. This was a landslide that occurred outside of Colburn that's still visible in Google Maps if you want to look for it. I want to draw your attention to a production facility at the toe of this slope that just narrowly avoided catastrophe. The tanks here, probably about 300 or 400 barrel tanks. Also, that the fact that the landslide cut off the road accessing this facility. Thankfully, integrity was maintained in this instance, but had those tanks ruptured or there been another upset condition as a result of the landslide, then access would have been pretty difficult. Here on the left is a smaller version of a similar issue. This landslide occurred north of Parachute again, and it also happens to have an oil and gas pad at the toe of it. Really, this is just to drive home the fact that these facilities, particularly the large pits or the massive tanks associated with them, need to be sited carefully. Operators are aware of this in order to mitigate some of this geologic instability. Air quality, again, is a concern for folks in the West in the meetings that we've had with communities. Folks have been adamant to point out that the air quality in the West has a value in its own. The concern being that it is treated as sort of a blank slate or an empty bucket when compared to the ozone non-attainment area on the Front Range. But this is actually something that folks are adamant about improving the quality of life for folks in the West Slope, as well as the livelihood for some. There are routine emissions associated with regular operations. The photo here on the right actually is a driving survey from back when it was the COGCC. This was conducted in Weld County in response to the Firestone explosion in 2017. This depicts the location of the vehicle with the survey equipment on it, with the blue arrows representing wind speed and direction. There was a detection of methane as well as VOCs during a swabbing operation. You kind of expect that, but the proximity here to community and the direction of the wind really illustrates the impacts that folks will experience potentially depending on the setback distances. Of course, local emissions contribute to emissions globally. So we have a chart here of global carbon dioxide emissions as well as atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations measured over the years. Folks in our conversations are concerned with the climate implications of unmitigated emissions or partially mitigated emissions. It is largely accepted to be the scientific consensus that global warming on to the tune of 1.5 degrees centigrade is considered to be sort of a point of no return. This study, reflected in this map on the right side, indicates that there were 24 counties in Colorado in 2019 who had experienced warming, localized warming, exceeding that 1.5 degrees centigrade threshold. And the map really depicts well impacts are localized in the West and sort of not evenly distributed. So disproportionate impacts located in Moffett, Rio Blanco, Garfield Mesa, Delta, Montrose, San Miguel, Ouray, Dolores, San Juan counties, and more. And folks are concerned with financial liability. There are challenges to maintaining a successful operation. I think that I've worked with a lot of folks. I've had the benefit of folks who have very highly maintained LDAR and due diligence programs. Folks are able to maintain these facilities. So this doesn't apply to every operator, but people are concerned if these facilities go under for some reason that they might be held liable for abandonment, remediation, reclamation charges to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. This photo is an example from a facility outside of Quebec that has fallen into disrepair. I don't believe that this is entered into the Orphan Well program at the moment, but significant investment would be required just to get this thing back online, let alone to fully reclaim and remediate this area. And folks in communities are concerned with being left on the hook for that. Finally, the major through line that I've experienced in work as a community liaison is that folks have a desire for increased transparency and, as I mentioned, equal protection, particularly when it comes to West Slope versus Front Range DI communities. These are some direct quotes from community members. Folks have asked to make this community involvement worth their time. I'd like to acknowledge the folks who provided public comment in this meeting today. They were able to take time away from their lives during the middle of the business day to participate. And that is because they feel strongly about voicing their concerns for their community. I've had the benefit of working with folks like that in this new role. Folks also expressed a desire to have more protection and not more process. This was an interesting concept in my mind because folks have described the complications associated with the permitting processes. And I think that there's some overlap there for folks wanting things to be streamlined and effective. And finally, there have been specific asks across some of our meetings for folks to define things like adverse impacts and denial criteria in order to facilitate their sort of interpretation of the permit applications as they become available to the public. So with that, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the work of the Produced Water Consortium. This is a very difficult and complicated problem. So I like to use this image to sort of exemplify the challenges of differing perspectives of what's going on. But really just want to leave you with the concept that with great volumes of produced water comes great responsibility. So I appreciate your time and I'm open for questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate the presentation. Was it a bad fireman?
I'm a fan.
Does anyone have any questions for Stephen? Next up is going to be Matt Sura. Thanks, Stephen. Great perspective, and if there are any questions that come out, we'll have people reach out directly to you. But appreciate you being here and presenting the perspective that you did. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Mr. Sura is going to present. He's the attorney for Western Colorado Alliance. He's going to present on historical considerations for produced water in the Western Slope. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Matt Sura, I am representing Western Colorado Alliance today. I was invited here by Barbara Vesquez, who was at a table with the Consortium. Western Colorado Alliance has been around since 1980, actually, and they're a community organizing model, which means that the community, the members of Western Colorado Alliance really drive that organization. They decide what issues are going to work on, what positions are. It's not the director, it's not funders, it's the members. And I was really proud to be a part of Western Colorado Alliance for 12 years. Started in 1996 and helped it started the Grand Valley Citizens Alliance. Really proud to have worked with them for as long as I did. I was also an energy policy organizer. When I got my law degree as a second career, I went into oil and gas. Shocking. And ended up working on the Front Range where the oil and gas boom kind of followed me there. And I now represent a lot of local governments as well as conservation organizations and individuals. But when I was in Garfield County, it was incredible. And I know that a lot of people understand that, and Kirby had mentioned it as well. We had over 40 rigs at once in the Grand Valley in Garfield County. And the type of devastation that we were seeing, the amount of work that was being done by this industry without really adequate regulations, led to a lot of disasters, environmental, ecological disasters. It also hurt the community. And I was involved in trying to rectify that and bring those voices that were being harmed to the fold and try to create some change. And I think that we have over the last 20 years, but it's been a long, long time coming. Can't see that if you could move that. What you're doing right now is really valuable work. Working as a consortium, bringing all these diverse perspectives together is very, very difficult. I think that it's like, it's a balancing act, I heard someone say, but it's also juggling these various impacts because they're all occurring, and which one is more important? They're going to occur at different times. It is a juggling act. So you see the guy juggling 5 baseball bats. He's got a still with a lady on top of it. She's juggling 4, and she's got a lamp on her head. And that's the kind of work you're up to. And so it's really difficult. I commend you for it. Keep the balance. We're going to talk about impacts to water quality, quantity, impacts to transportation, air quality, and moving into fracking. Hydraulic fracturing is something that we were talking about in the Grand Valley before it was cool, because it was happening here first in a lot of respects. The tight sand formations of the Williams Fork was where we were seeing some of the first hydraulic fracturing, and it was a lot of impact, a tremendous impact. We saw the water trucks that we heard about. I heard about 5 million gallons, but the figure that was talked about earlier was that there's 3,375 trucks per well. That's well over 5,000.
Well pad.
If it's a well pad, then that makes more sense. So literally, that's a huge amount of water, regardless, and a lot of water truck trips, and that was something that we were experiencing firsthand at the Grand Valley Citizens Alliance. Took away my ability.
Sorry.
All right. Yep. We also were among one of the first organizations to start talking about the composition of fracking fluid. What is actually in this? And we're working with hand in glove with Theo Corburn in the endocrine exchange. And she was bringing for the first time evidence as to what was really going down hole, and ultimately could be, in spills and in other ways, ending up in our water supply. And so this is just some of Theo's early work. And we did see waste pits. We saw leaking waste pits. And at the time, waste pits were a place to store, but also to try to evaporate, to try to make sure that you have to take those truck trips that are very expensive They tried to get it to evaporate into our atmosphere. And so huge relief when the industry, because they wanted to avoid those impacts. They also wanted to save money. And we got a pipeline system on the western slope that is envy of Colorado and probably the United States. And it is fantastic, eliminating a lot of that truck traffic, a lot of those water concerns, some of the water concerns, some of the air concerns, but concerns remain. This is a recent spill just in the last couple months up above Silt, south of Silt, where there was a release of pipeline. The pipeline is plastic, HE. Anyways, it's a plastic pipeline that burst, and it's about 20 years old. A lot of those 11,000 wells that Kirby was talking about were drilled right around 20 to 15 years ago. So some of that infrastructure is going to be starting to age out and needs to be replaced, needs to be maintained. And right now, TEP is doing a really good job. I haven't seen that they've got a huge influx of spills, but that could change as that infrastructure gets older. This is a pond that was contaminated, that's contaminated water. They had to dredge that out. Many dozens of water trucks had to take all that water out, and they had to remove all the contaminated soil. And that's what it looks like. So moving into impacts to air quality, we have local impacts, we have regional impacts, and we have global impacts. And I'm only going to talk about really the local impacts. One of the first ways that we were working on air quality impacts of the oil and gas industry were these commercial evaporative waste facilities. And there was one that was a particularly bad facility that's called Black Mountain Wastewater Disposal in Mesa County, but right near DePac, south of DePac. And the orders were terrible. They weren't doing any processing of it. It was one of these evaporative waste facilities. So they were doing not only putting in untreated water, but then they were putting it in these huge fountains to try to evaporate it as quickly as possible. And the people downwind were just getting sick. And came to Western Colorado Alliance, and there's really not a lot we could do at the time because the rules weren't what they are today, but the rules were being violated, and ultimately they got in a lot of trouble. It was a catastrophic company. Ultimately, we also got involved in another commercial waste facility because there was another one that was going to locate just outside of DePac. And we talked to DePac Town Council about the impacts that we saw from the Black Mountain facility and got them engaged enough where this, you can imagine, a conservation organization coming into the town of DePac, very conservative folks, very pro oil and gas, unanimously opposed to this new evaporative waste facility that was going to be outside their town. And we were able to win that at the Mesa County Commissioners, and it got denied. Ultimately, that brought in the interests of Bernie Busher and Senator Josh Penry, who was the state president, state Senate president, to pass House Bill 08-1414, which required bigger liners and a distance of these locations away from homes for the first time. At the time, they didn't have any sort of distance like that, and even at ECMC, CODCSB at the time, they were at 150 feet from facilities, single-family homes. That was the setback. So that was an important victory. Western Colorado Alliance has continued working on these types of issues. I just recently, with a parachute water management facility located in the facility that's just above the parachute. I think I can point to it there. It's a town of Parachute. It's about a mile, because the parachute goes all the way here. It's just a mile away from the town of Parachute, and on a lot of uncovered pits. And one of the reasons that they got involved is that they were finally getting to their Title V permit, and that's a longer story, but the crux of the issue is that there are a lot of benzene and toluene. So this has hazardous air pollutants as a major source for hazardous air pollutants. And it also has a lot of VOCs. It wasn't considered a major source for volatile organic compounds because it was a pit. And as a pit, it was considered that those emissions were fugitive emissions, and therefore they weren't really controllable by the industry, and therefore it didn't fall under a major source. And that was a concern because at the time the threshold was 250 tons per year. It's now 100 tons per year. They were producing, and probably still are, maybe still are, 716 tons per year of volatile organic compounds. I'm not sure what we're seeing here, but this is supposedly a newspaper article about TEP's facility. And it looks as though they've got the bird netting up, certainly. But it also appears as though that there may be some sprinklers. And maybe this is a bit of a disposal facility as well. I don't know, and I'd love to hear more about it. And these things obviously are going to emit. That's what they're intended to do. And if you don't do a lot of pre-treatment, everything that's in there is going to volatilize. Volatile organic compounds, that's their job. They're going to volatilize without even sunlight. Just being out in the atmosphere, they're going to volatilize. But with sunlight, they're all going to get into the atmosphere. And this is a FLIR image video from Andrew Fluster from Earthworks, and thank you for this. This is out in California, but it's a similar type issue. The pit emission working group came out of the effort for emission change rulemaking, and they didn't work long, but it didn't really get as much accomplished as I think that they intended to, or certainly the commissioners wanted them to accomplish. But one of the things that came out of the recommendations of June 2023 was some pits may be significant sources of emissions, particularly VOCs, which is an understatement, but that they wanted to produce water consortium to do the work of trying to find out alternatives for pits. Because pits are terrible for the environment, terrible for air quality. Unless you've got a tremendous amount of pre-treatment, but if you're going to do that much pre-treatment, that's just not typically what is done, in the oil and gas sector, to be able to eliminate those volatile organic compounds and those other benzene and other emissions that you don't want in the atmosphere. And again, this is another one, we've already seen this, but if you have tanks, you have an ability to put those emissions into a pipe and get them to an emission control device that is going to incinerate those. And so they're not volatile organic compounds that are causing harm. Whether it's benzene, whether it's toluene, whether it's volatile organic compounds generally that cause ozone issues, you want to get those controlled. So this is an example of EPF just recently did satellite imagery for methane, and they're looking at about 31 tons per hour of methane emitted in the Front Range, and it's about 1.7% of the production of methane is going into the atmosphere, which seems like a lot. Until you look at what's happening here on the Western Slope, and they're looking at 57 tons per hour, and we're looking at 7% of the methane produced is being emitted into the atmosphere. Is that being emitted because of these water facilities? It certainly could be part of it. And I would hope that you would look at those and try to address air quality in terms of these facilities. I think that they can be important for recycling water, but they certainly have huge air quality impacts particularly if they are pits. And again, looking at the Piance in comparison to all the other basins, Piance is 7%, and the only other basin that's higher is at Winta at 7.8% of the methane loss rate. And finally, talking about Western Slope disproportionately impacted communities. As a community organizer for over a dozen years, I know how hard it is to engage the community firsthand. It's really difficult to get people involved. And there are barriers to involvement that make these large areas disproportionately impacted communities. And mostly it's income, frankly. Income is a huge barrier to involvement, like language. And that if you are trying to hold down 2 jobs, you're not going to be attending the Produced Water Consortium meeting down the street, even if you were interested, even if you even knew about it. You know, folks who have no time, you know, because they're working so hard, you know, are going to spend that little time that they have checking over their kids' homework rather than even reading a newspaper. So to get those folks involved is really, really difficult. And that's why they have the protections that they do, and those need to be maintained. And here again, we've got Rio Blanco, Garfield County, and Mesa. But a lot of these are disproportionately impacted communities, and I recognize that this is an important issue because, you know, you look at where your infrastructure is, it's a lot of DIC country. And I also recognize that a lot of that is public lands and probably doesn't have a lot of folks still in large part. So there may be an opportunity. We have to work on this air quality issue, or really the communities that I've worked with on the Western Slope don't want to have anything more to do with these open pits and centralized waste facilities. So good luck in your efforts in balancing and juggling this issue. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone have questions, better understand math perspective? Well, thanks for presenting that and providing the information and important perspective to hear. Next up, we've got Commissioner Doug Overton from Rio Blanco County. He's going to share perspective on DI communities, natural resources, and
a lot of good stuff. My name is Doug Overton. I'm a commissioner from Rio Blanco County. A lot of the stuff that I was going to talk about, you've already covered, so I'm going to try and go through this very fast. Catch up on something. This is a map of infrastructure in Rio Blanco County and Garfield counties that produce recycled piped water in no, it isn't. I skipped ahead and going to skip all that. You've seen this water atlas referenced a lot in presentations, but it highlights the groundwater aquifer for the oil and gas activities and why it's more suitable for drilling activities rather than beneficial use. There's a lot of it up there. Because the groundwater, Rio Blanco and Garfield counties are ideal locations for utilizing recycled produced water and as well as piping infrastructure. The brackish and saline nature of groundwater in the region makes it ideal for recycling oil and gas protectants. Unlike fresh water, it is not viable for any other large-scale beneficial use, reinforcing the importance of sustainable reuse practices. Operators in the basin utilizing recycling are able to recycle up to 90% produced water rather than fresh water. The ability to recycle in the basin is the exact offset we need in Colorado for areas where produced water are not available, like the BJ Basin. Go ahead. This is the map that highlights the infrastructure that's in Rio Blanco and Garfield County, but this is just one corner. I don't think this is all of the pipelines that are there. This map is from QB Energy that provides an exact extent at which limitations of recycled water infrastructure could be impacted in DICs. Try to imagine what the alternative is if current infrastructure or future infrastructure is limited by produced water rules. This is just one example from one operator that fundamentally increases efficiency, decreases fresh water use, and eliminates the emissions from transport. The decrease in traffic itself is the number one reason, the number one source for public complaints. And as of beneficial for wildlife as well. Go to the next one. This is a DOLA map that shows the largest percentage of citizens in second largest percentage of citizens in Rio Blanco County is 13.4% that are in this industry. It does not include the residents employed that live outside of the county, and drive up to the county every day, and also includes extractive industries like coal. Oil and gas accounts for approximately 70% of Rio Blanco County's tax income. It's huge for us. The ability for operators to continue their presence in Rio Blanco County is essential not only for the economy, but also for local jobs. The prohibition on produced water recycling facilities in DICs will adversely impact rural communities that rely so significantly on operators' presence. And those operators rely on the ability to recycle. Okay. CDPHE definition of a DIC. Through DIC designations both DIC designations are based on census laws and could be expected to remain consistent. Rio Blanco County has changed with the EnviroScreen 2, where we no longer have a DIC designation in Rio Blanco County, outside of 3 mobile home parks that are in the towns. While in EnviroScreen 1, Rio Blanco County has multiple DICs. And it's because of the EnviroScreens, not because of the population of the Indian. It's just the EnviroScreen. We recognize that 2.0 will remove many of the DICs in Rio Blanco County. Concern is the future revisions could designate those or other areas as DICs. So adoption of the 2.0 is not going to be a long-term fix to go back and forth because of the EnviroScreen, not because of the census law. This inconsistency is another challenge for operators and local governments working to navigate the associated regulations. Consistency. But more importantly, rural counties like Rio Blanco County have built inflexibility for applicable regulations within the DICs. For instance, for issues like produced water recycling facilities, particularly in the Peanuts Creek Basin. Until I grew up in Meeker, because I'm always seeing the Peanuts Creek. Which was a designated DIC in EnviroScreen 1. If you have ever visited the region, we did this morning, you know how sparsely populated the region is. Rio Blanco County just asked that you consider if regulating produced water recycling in that region for the sake of DICs makes sense. We don't think it does. Both DICs are determined with census data. There are environmental triggers that could designate a census block as a DIC. These triggers, like temperature and drought, fluctuate and impact the census block, EnviroScreen percentile score. Thus, potentially designating block as a DIC, or in the instance of Rio Blanco County census blocks, are no longer DICs with EnviroScreen 2. But as we understand this methodology, we could change in the future. It is important to note that the Environmental Justice Act specifically allows agencies to tailor the application of DICs to achieve the goal of the Act, which was to reduce the impact on vulnerable communities. ECMC has the authority but chose not to exercise it during the produced water rulemaking. Produced Water Consortium should make a recommendation to the ECMC to exercise flexibility. We would support Western Slope COGA's proposed approach from the rulemaking, which was to allow such facilities and DICs to be based on proximity to the residents and other buildings and the local government's approval. Something we forget about is local governments have a lot to do with this stuff. This level was uncertainty. Uncertainty is not sustainable for oil and gas operators. And again, please consider built-in flexibility regarding water recycling. What we got? Unintended consequences. We can talk about produced water regulations and rules without discussing the associated complications regarding the DIC. Rio Blanco County wants to prioritize the well-being of its citizens when it comes to the environment. But we also want to consider their well-being when it comes to the local economy. In order for county governments to do so, we need to consider the following. Certainty of DIC designations on the western slope. The environmental benefits of produced recycled water in Penis Basin. I'll highlight some of that stuff on the next slide. We implemented recycle credits for a reason. In the Penis Basin is the perfect region to provide those credits, unless we develop a produced water recycling rules that hemorrhage that ability. Note the amount of projected conserved fresh water from just one operator in the Penis Basin. The reduced truck traffic because of recycled facilities. We are also going to have environmental trade-offs associated with multiple use activities on federal lands. And it is our responsibility and the state's responsibility to develop rules that equally balance those trade-offs with the economic well-being of local governments and its citizens. The alternative to recycling facilities will have its own environmental impacts on the local communities. Think about it. Built-in flexibility regarding produced water rulemaking specifically related to recycling in Western Slopes DICs. Counties need consistency. Enviro Screen 1, Western, and Central Rio Blanco is designated as a DIC. Enviro Screen 2 does not. Understand that one size fits all DIC approach is not appropriate for the rural Western Slope communities. Regulations being guided by DICs negatively impact exact demographics they're designed to protect. And I like to see it, you shoot yourself in the foot. Regulates operators in the Western Slope communities already exceeding expectations regarding recycled water. Penis Basin cannot and should not be regulated like other basins are. And just because of time, I think Kirby and I can do questions at the same time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So if Kirby wants to go right in, that's great. Thanks, Commissioner.
Kirby Wayne, oil and gas liaison, point here with our community development director, Lynn Hartman, and our principal planner, Philip Berry. Y'all, it must be a long day. Not to hurt our feelings. I would encourage you just to stand. You can stand up while you're watching our thing. Stretch. You don't. A lot of y'all have a long drive. I would encourage you to start getting untinged. Do this while you all are getting yourself together, water, that sort of thing. So anyway, we're going to present you. We've got about 11,000 wells. We've seen produced water over the years. We've seen doing that and the ugly of it. Sure. We're gonna talk about some things we think that have worked well over the last 10 or so years to really improve the quality of life. And get right to it, because I know we're running a little bit late today. So this is a map, and you're gonna see this a lot. I just want to point out this, so you've seen this a lot. These are the produced water facilities, the lines, and the centralized facilities, and some of the pits and things. In Garfield County, you've got Rio Blanco County up here, and Mesa County down here. Right here, you've got the Divide Road Water Treatment Facility that you all visited right there on our county line earlier today, reference, a very rural area, as you saw. So, back that up. And so with that, I'm going to tee it up for our planners to talk about some of the planning aspects, how we permit these oil and gas facilities, and the importance of how we look at things with a fine tooth comb when we look at them. And then I'll pick it up after them, and I will discuss some of the things, because I'm also the complaints department on a lot of things. It's oil and gas liaison for the county. My phone is the one that rings at midnight. Somebody's aggravated by oil and gas. That's by design. I make sure everybody knows how to reach me. And that's what we do to make sure that I can call it operating, call it state regulars if necessary, drop of the hat to try to take care of issues. So when things are going well, I know about it because I don't get the calls. And when we have problems, I really know about it because I get those calls all hours a day. Try to take care of folks.
All right. Here to talk about everyone's favorite topic, that is land use decision-making in Garfield County. I know that everyone here is excited about this as I am.
I'm excited.
I know, I feel the energy. Kirby's really setting me up great. Appreciate it. Garfield County, as you may know, is a large county. We have a lot of different types of land. We have a lot of different types of development patterns that's going on. Because of that, we have to do something that developers do not really like, including normal land use developers, not just our oil and gas developers. We have a very thorough application review process. So we don't have a lot of by right uses for more intense uses, such as centralized facilities or for large neighborhoods or anything like that. We are requiring our applicants to come to us with a lot of information to show feasibility, protecting health, welfare, and safety for our county. The way this works, we have some broad zone districts. You'll see that in the next slide. We look at what your proposed use is, what the context of that use is, as far as the history of the property, the neighboring properties, and that's going to tell us what your application review process is. In general, we have a director's decision. That's Glenn back behind me. He's going to be the first person to make that decision. There's the ability to appeal that to the board. That doesn't apply to these types of facilities. There's a limited impact review that goes to our Board of County Commissioners for a decision at a noticed hearing. Some of the previous facilities of this type that we have approved have gone through that process. That's kind of the main one that we use for a lot of these different types. And we have the major impact review. That's if a use is kind of outside of the typical considerations for that zone district or for that comprehensive plan land use designation district. And so that requires a recommendation from the Planning Commission before it goes to the Board of County Commissioners at a second hearing for a decision. This is a very poorly displaying zone district map for me. You got a little bleeded out here. Kind of this brown area that you can see that is in the DIC that we've been talking so much about here. That is called our resource land zone district. Okay. That's a lot of property that's owned by oil and gas companies or other large scale areas. This area has typically been kind of historically used for those types of extraction, or has been used primarily as hunting ranches or other very, very low density. The darker green that you can see kind of further to the west here and north here in the flat tops, that's our public land zoning district. So a lot of our land use processes don't directly apply. This is a lot of BLM land, U.S. Forest Service land, some state land. Sometimes our 1041s kick in, but we're not going to go into that much detail today on our land use processes. The lighter green color, that's where things get more interesting. That's our rural zone district. The vast majority of my work takes place in these kinds of districts here. This is down to 2 acres in size, a lot of historically agricultural land, ranches, large lot development, rural style residential development. We also have a lot of oil and gas production. And that's where, those are the types of areas where we're going to be looking a lot more at compatibility and conformance when we have intense uses coming in. So we'll be looking a lot more where your closest neighbors are and physical barriers and things like that. The three review processes all require the same submittal requirements that I'm going to make you look at in the next slide. And they all go through technical review by our referral agencies. All of our applications require a pre-application conference. Come to me. We schedule a meeting. You're going to sit down with one of our planners. We're going to look at your property, look at your use. We're going to figure out what your process is. We're going to try to figure out what the red flags are for it. That's where we're going to start telling you things like go to CPW, go to CDPHE, answer these air quality questions, answer these water quality questions, answer your wildlife impacts before you even bring your application to me. Our oil and gas developers typically know that, so they're ahead of the game on that, but sometimes they need that reminder at the pre-application conference summary. After the pre-application conference, application comes in, we do a technical completeness review. This is where staff tries to make sure that we have all the submittal requirements, we have enough detail to properly review the application. Sometimes this is where we come back and we start asking for things like a phase 1, if we have a previously environmentally impacted property, or other types of more intense engineering documentation. Occasionally we'll go out to one of our referral agencies at that point to say, hey, is this enough engineering for you to review this application? Do we have enough details for you to make a proper recommendation to us? These are the submittal requirements, pretty broad stroke submittal requirements. And as I was mentioning earlier, the director may decide that some additional requirements are necessary for an application. What gets tricky here is our Article 7 standards and our impact analysis cover a wide range of topics. 1001 is, for instance, is our industrial standards. So this is where, so those two sections is where we start drawing in wildlife impact studies, stormwater plans, just full-on engineering reports. This is where my appendices for applications start getting 100 pages long in their own work type. And we started killing a lot of trees because we still require paper copies of applications. The impact analysis also, that is especially where we get into some of the nuisances, such as, you know, less of CDPHE sometimes, but more just talking about glare, talking about noise impacts. I know ECMC actually does deal with this a lot too. Smells, things of that nature. One thing that's critical for what we're talking about here is these traffic studies. There are three things I always tell my applicants about: water, wastewater, and traffic. And those are the three things that'll kill an application faster than anything else in Garfield County. And so one thing that we really like about these centralized systems, especially with our pipeline system, is our producers have greatly decreased the traffic on our county road systems and our local road systems. That's something that you'll hear about a lot.
To tag team a little bit with Philip, this slide is kind of a compilation of a lot of different, I'll call them partners. Referral agencies is another more specific term. These are where our applications are going out to, and it includes a lot of referrals. If anything, you know, we like to overextend ourselves a little bit, working with any number of agencies, and I'll highlight a couple of these. We got really good partners with CDPHE. We heard some of their presentation today. A strong referral connection with them. Also, our public health department, environmental health component of that. That is a really robust air quality monitoring system. So obviously want to acknowledge that. Garfield County is super active in that respect, has monitoring, you know, stations in a number of different locations, in particular in the Rifle Valley. Vegetation management has to do with reclamation. Consulting engineers, there's a couple of them listed there. We don't have an engineer on staff, so we go out and we hire up, you know, water consulting engineers and civil consulting engineers as appropriate. So we've got good resources there. Reference in the middle of the slide, the oil and gas review and permitting consultants. We realize we're a pretty small staff. We're looking at 50% of the planners today. So this is an important issue for us. And so we would go out to, you know, other consultants that are specializing in oil and gas review. So no lack of reaching out to pull in other resources. Another highlight on the lower left there, local jurisdictions. We have an IGA with all of our municipalities that requires us to do referrals to them. We've got, you can get technical with planning and say, okay, there's 3-mile planning areas, but we don't hesitate to get out and refer them to the towns and local jurisdictions. So that's an important consideration for sure. On the bottom of the slide shows a couple other key agencies. BLM is critical, Army Corps of Engineers, Division of Water Resources, anything water is going to get a referral to the division. They're very active and very assistant, help us out. couple others, MCWC, Middle Colorado Water Conservation Council, ABLT, there's good examples of other agencies and other resources that we would draw on. So we don't hold back in terms of getting the word out and getting input from lots of folks. So that's a quick summary of what we do referral-wise. And this is not all the referral agencies. Our list gets even longer than that, but I figured that was enough for a PowerPoint slide. This is just two previous approvals that we've had for a centralized water or produced water facility. You saw the Divide Road produced water facility earlier today. That was originally approved in 2013 under our previous code. There has been a lot of changes in some of these items since between those two codes. That was approved with 12 conditions. Those conditions address topics such as secondary containment, wildlife protection, and air quality measures. Another facility that was approved, this one was in 2010, this was the Greenback Produced Water Recovery Facility. That was actually done as a major impact review because CDPHE's early comments kicked it from a water impoundment definition up to a solid waste disposal center. So that took us from that limited impact, which is how we usually deal with these, up into a major impact review. So that's just an example of how we kind of work with these state agencies sometimes and adjust our process and definitions as necessary. That was approved. They had 27 conditions of approval, which also ranged, again, maximum trips per day, critical topic for anything that's going on in Garfield County, especially putting heavy trucks on the road, and then also revegetation securities. In addition to these processes, we have an oil and gas development permit. This lives in our Article 9. This section got major reviews from the Senate bill that I just got the number of. I apologize, 191. First thing that we're always trying to do is protect our public health, safety, and welfare, and the environment and wildlife resources of Garfield County. We try to keep our processes as efficient as we can for our developers and for our landowners, but we are always looking at that number one item there. This is just our comprehensive future land use map. Again, it's a little bleeded out here on the presentations, but you can kind of see it matches really closely to what we're seeing with that zoning map. And also, we have this large area, this light green, and this one is kind of that resource lands, mineral extractions, things like that is kind of what that future land use map is anticipating. And as you can see, remember earlier, that's overlapping with a lot of the DIC that we're going to be seeing in Garfield County. Our future land or our comprehensive plan has several issues that these facilities directly support. Number one being that transportation. Our comprehensive plan directly was calling out, trying to figure out ways to minimize heavy traffic related to our industrial and extraction uses. So this pipeline system really does a lot to support our comprehensive plan. In addition, we have some policies that are elsewhere, just about supporting the oil and gas extraction, balancing impacts with wildlife and the environment as well, but also making sure that we are recycling and reusing our water and supporting and protecting our freshwater resources in the county as well. So just to kind of wrap up really fast, our current review includes compatibility with neighboring properties, health, safety, wildlife impacts. We coordinate with local, state, federal agencies, and we require a public hearing as part of this with public notice as well. We see a lot of benefits from these centralized water facilities, namely with getting a lot of that heavy truck traffic off of our county roads, and also promoting the industry in general, the job opportunities and commerce that comes associated with that. And our code is kind of a living code. We will always be updating our code based on new technologies, new uses, and new priorities that are coming from our elected officials or from ECMC. Our quick summary on the process pieces. In terms of the community development department, we've got the right codes in place. We've got staff resources and employee agencies, a process that includes a lot of public outreach. So we feel we're well positioned, in line with ECMC to basically protect all populations as it relates to these types of facilities. Thank you, Glenn and Philip. Those are the ones that really know how we apply our land use code and decide where we will or won't allow these types of facilities. And we won't allow them when they're not in the right spot. So one thing I was remiss to say, so again, this is our DIC maps of these orange shaded areas that you've been seeing today. I wanted to point out What I've got on here is Enviro Screen 2.0, which has the new updated DIC maps that you can see in Rio Blanco County. There's no DIC up there. The reason I did that, even though that's not currently adopted, it's adopted by CDPHE for their air rules, but it hasn't been adopted yet by ECMC. But by the end of this year, ECMC is going to adopt exactly these maps for our area. So they've got a rulemaking that's going to be on the docket real soon, and this fall they'll adopt it. So I figured instead of showing you something that's going to be irrelevant in a couple of months, I'm talking about what's on the ground, where the DICs are, what we're talking about, what's going to be the rule of the road, as it were, very, very soon. So I point that out. Also want to mention that Melissa Cottrey with ECMC, who is one of their GIS specialists, did a fantastic job and helped me put together most of these maps. And that was just a huge help to help us clearly try to discuss something. So I want to express appreciation. So again, just fortunately impacted community map here and our produced water infrastructure. The summary on this one here, what I'm going to talk about in more detail is you can see in here all this is our oil and gas terrain over here. This is oil and gas terrain over here. This is in a DIC. There's a little area in here that's not DIC, but most of Garfield County and Mesa County's active oil and gas areas are within DICs. And so this means that new centralized produced water facility rule that's based on the presence of a DIC will absolutely have an immediate impact on the local oil and gas operators. And as such, we think it is appropriate to include some kind of flexibility and off ramps to that rule that would otherwise fully prohibit centralized facilities and DICs. I'll talk about some of the reasoning on that here in a second. Again, here's this map, and again, this is just a repeat that shows where you all were today in remote rural Garfield County today. And so again, these produced water facilities, we think that they should be permitted in certain DICs under certain conditions of remote landscape settings in particular. The premise for my saying this is the ECMC Rule 907. It prohibits all new produced water storage and treatment facilities, centralized ones, and associated pipelines that would come in with those within a DIC. We think that should be refined with flexible off-ramps that recognize that in most of the oil and gas development settings, certainly within our area, the best way to protect and enhance the welfare of our residents in these rural areas is to encourage rather than prohibit the use of centralized water handling facilities and associated piping in lieu of this heavy truck transport. As you're talking about hundreds of thousands of trucks when it's a busy time. You're talking, 3,000 truck trips for one well to that sort of thing. That stuff is gone. We put those guys out of business. That was a business to put out of business, sure. And sorry, truck drivers, that's just right. And again, the reasoning, it's our belief that without further legislative action, the commission has the authority and should tailor the definition of DIC in certain circumstances to allow the placement of these new centralized water storage treatment facilities. Again, within certain uninhabited or sparsely populated West Slope areas for very specific DIC designations. And one of those might be based on regional income levels. I'll tell you what, for these areas we have it's rated as low income levels, the folks there that have some really good jobs, a lot of them are actually working in oil and gas, and that's really paying the way for their families, no question. Further reasoning on this, water truck traffic and other heavy truck traffic had been one of the most common resident complaint issues reported to my office. I'm the complaints department, as I told you, big time. I mean, on average, when ECMC, they have a complaint process, they have a tool to go through that. Every time I've checked it over the last 12 years, my complaint traffic compared to the states is 10 to 1 at least. People are calling the local folks to get something taken care of locally. Nothing wrong with ECMC, but people do come to local governments looking for a solution, getting connected with the operator, to get somebody to stop doing something that's irritating, et cetera. So I happen to be that guy for the last 12 years. So anyway, that's one of the big issues that gets reported to me right up until the advent of the centralized infrastructures for water to pipe and recycle almost all the produced water. The issues that they had, you've heard it before, is safety, is accidents, is noise, jake brakes going up and down these hills, even small grades, got a water truck and it's, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten called all hours of the day. I get up, I get with the operator, I get with whomever, and we get some corrective actions going. But when those trucks are not on the road, it doesn't happen. And we don't want to just fix the problem. We want the problem to not be there. So we think we've solved something, the real problem. We really don't want to see that come back. There's no reason to go backwards. So again, exhaust fumes, dust, road damage, all. So before mass scale water recycling became the norm in our area, multiple complaint calls per day and night were received by office, no question. So currently such complaints are rare, and that's a good thing. As operators naturally are going to step outward, why this is relevant, when they step outward from where the current development area is, where you saw the pipelines, you've seen it 20 times, these maps we showed you today. When they step out into these newer areas, they need infrastructure. And so we need to find a way to allow, where it's a reasonable location, to allow these centralized facilities to prevent a return of water trucks clogging and damaging our roads and creating these nuisance issues for our residents. Again, I actually already covered this. I think that was a duplicate. I apologize for that. So again, here's your map again. On this one, it has just a little bit more to it. I had some of the pits in the area. I had a hard time on this one. I think the state did too. They have a pits layer. And I think this isn't just water pits, it's a little bit more, but it gives you an idea. There's areas out here that are active oil and gas areas as well. And eventually they're going to probably need to have some infrastructure out there to avoid using trucks. So again, as produced water infrastructure increased in our area, the daily torrent of water trucks has reduced to a trickle, no question. Put those guys out of business. Good thing. This provides, and it has provided and continues to provide, significant and a very lasting quality of life boost for our residents over the 20+ year life cycle of these individual wells all over our county, without question. So just ask you to consider that and understand a little bit about that. Again, this map here, this was just a little bit different view. It's a little bit washed out. Actually, you can see it right. And actually on that map, you can see it better, but these gray dots, what we did here is I try to show whether you have like a bigger circle right here, what that is there's a higher density of actual oil and gas wells in place right there. Whereas these smaller dots in different places, like right here, is fewer relative wells. And so as I just clogging up the map with dots, I want to show you, this is our more intense activity areas right around here, but we definitely have oil and gas activity out here. Of course, Rio Blanco has plenty of it over there. Mesa County, there's plenty of their DIC area right down in here. They have those actually are, I don't believe those are actually oil gas wells, that's something else over there. But anyway, just wanted to show you where the density of our activity is. Of course, you've seen the maps with all the pipelines overlaid. It's not out here. Also wanted to point out, so you see these black lines in here, these are county roads. And then these smaller ones are a little bit covered by the gray. This is all of our road infrastructure, these farm to market type roads. Those are the roads that our residents go to their little ranches or ranchette or their house, their mobile home, wherever they are. Out here, there's lots of folks out of here. And when those get filled up with trucks, the phone's ringing, people are upset, there's accidents, there's fear, that sort of thing. You know, you see this big truck coming, you think it's coming 90 miles an hour. It's coming 22 miles an hour, but it looks like it's 90 and it just shakes you up. We've gotten rid of those. That's just a big deal and a great success story. This is an example here. This is actually this year's Divide Creek, as observed in today's field tour. We believe that it was permitted by the county. It's appropriately located in this way away from homes, 4 miles away from the nearest home, I think it was, and it prevents a massive influx of impactful water truck traffic. It's going to come all the way from I-70. It's going to come over from the highways over and Peons Creek up in Rio Blanco County and go by people's houses, ranches to get there. And so we've gotten rid of that. And that's just that's a wonderful thing. So to us, it would be difficult to conjure up any reason this type of facility, this location should not have been allowed. There's no reason to think that this thing shouldn't be allowed. And there's no reason we can think of in a similar setting to disallow a similarly situated facility also is what we believe. That's the kind of place we look for. We're happy to prove them because they have a net absolute welfare benefit to our residents. Again, here a little further reasoning of this map here. This is an example from Laramie Energy, and I'll point out here a little bit. So this is the active development area for Laramie Energy up in Rio Blanco County. Great, get busy drilling up in there. That's up in Garfield County. Excuse me. That's in our area. That's great. And down here is the town of Quebec. So this is a DIC. So when they need some water facilities, they need to come up with something. And they're going to come up with something, I'm sure. For them to have a centralized water facility, where it can't be here with current rules, but it can darn sure be right next to the town of Quebec. That's where it's going to land, right here. There's a road that goes right up Rome Creek, and they can work their way up. We don't want a water facility down here. It's legal. It'll probably get permitted. That's where it ought to be, right there. And so that's just an example of the active development being in a DIC, you could push something that you don't want necessarily near the town of Quebec into an area, and all those miles of either that, or they're gonna be trucking up here, or they're gonna have to put pipelines up through here, and they put the facility, the water facility down here. It's just what those unintended negative consequences of having a hard and fast black and white rule saying yes, no, DIC, no. We think that there's some refinement to that rule that would make sense. It's better for our citizens and better for Colorado, frankly. So with that, disproportionate impact communities, our point is, they are absolutely to be protected, no question. And in certain rural settings, it's just the way it is. Allowing centralized produced water facilities within a DIC more appropriate than disallowing them, and instead shoving a bunch of heavy water trucks on the road at a mass level. So that's our story, and we appreciate you all listening. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to address it. I believe we're joined with Rio Blanco County for question time as well. If you have any questions for Rio Blanco or Garfield County.
Thanks, Kirby. Appreciate it, and appreciate Commissioner Overton providing perspective of Rio Blanco County. Does the consortium have any questions for Kirby or Doug? Go ahead.
I have one, I think for Doug or maybe for the state, on the, when you were in the DIC in viral screen 1 to 2, do you know, was it a sin factor that in and out, or was it?
I think it was temperature. I haven't really compared that, what it was that dropped it off, but it's the overall average.
Yeah. But there wasn't one driving factor that.
I think there was 2.
I could be wrong. I thought part of it was income.
Well, it was. I mean, so my understanding is that, you know, one of the big things that drives the determination of disproportionate impact in communities is census block information. And I think the most updated census block information didn't identify that area as disproportionate. And one of the reasons that it was, as Doug said and Kirby said, is one of the criteria is that 40% of the population is below a certain income threshold. And that is one of the criteria. That may or may not be one of the criteria. I can't remember.
What I understood was it wasn't disproportionately impacted, but because of the way the rules are written, because it was viral screening.
Right, but a viral screen is stating that census block.
It was, I'm also almost certain it was greater than 40% below the income level, just like Garfield County. Might have one other, that was the primary thing.
But that is something just to keep in mind. I think both Doug Kirby brought it up as the viral screen score could change each time there's census information. So. And that's utilizing the statutory, right? So that's its statute.
And that's one of my concerns, like you're planning in one direction and then all of a sudden you're DIC.
Any other questions for y'all? This man.
I apologize. I mean, you can ask Kirby something offline, but questions are open for consortium. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So can Garfield County and maybe present in the future? I'm talking about community.
About the what?
Community engagement.
Sure, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, we can't hear very well online for anyone that's not right in front of a microphone.
I can repeat the question. I'm loud. Can you hear me? The question was.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
In Garfield County, and we have a nonprofit organization called Community Counts Colorado, which has a 24-hour call line for people who have questions or concerns about oil and gas. 24 hours a day they get answered. Questions could they present at a future time? We'd be happy to if that makes sense to the group.
That's great. Good suggestion. Look at what I like to do on future agenda. Thank you for that. Other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Without prompting another question, who pays for the 24-hour line? Like, how is that funded? I'm looking for local government fee.
So local governments and industry donate funds to this nonprofit to pay for the administrative costs.
Okay. Thank you.
Rio Blanco County, Garfield County, cities, they all pay. Then they also donate, and then some industry funds.
All right, folks. That's a wrap. Okay, we actually made it through